We are on the record. Thank you. Good morning.
Yes, good morning. We're call the meeting to order, and do we have a reading for this morning or record, anything?
Yes, and I'll be happy to if you would like.
Thank
Notice
you.
of the June 13th and June 14th board meeting for the architects and engineers was posted to the state's website on June the 8th.
Very good, thank you, thank you. Roll call. Do we take a formal roll call or just Frank?
Here.
Frank Waxter.
Here.
Rick Thompson.
Here.
Brian Tibbs.
Here.
All right, great. Let's see. I guess we can get going on our agenda. I'm pretty sure the only thing we have on our agenda this morning is the exam authorization. And I'm not real sure where we left that off. I apologize. So.
No, thank you very much. One thing regarding it that I did want to update our board and this committee in particular is Liz put together a fantastic document, and I will hand that out to everyone at the end of this committee meeting. I printed it but don't have it in hand. And it is to update the NCARB on where Tennessee is, the changes that have come and those in the pipeline. So she did a really good job. And one of the items that we have is things that have passed is the ability, of course, to submit our applicants that have the education and want to go ahead and take the exams directly. So that's kind of what we wanted to talk to the board about and make sure that we're all on the same page. Those are great news so that we can hopefully have applicants go directly, register, and then come back to us when the exam is completed for the full evaluation for their license. So if there are any concerns or thoughts you all had, I just want us to make sure, since we've been in transition and I'm new to it, that we're all on the same page, that the board then, our staff is going to be able to change a few things in our technology so that we can move smoother with that piece as well and just get the applicants when the totality of the exam, the 5.0, is passed.
I think the previous discussions were that from an administrative position, that really helps us and lets NCARB do some of the things that they're supposed to be doing that they weren't able to do previously with certain states. So it's a good news on that. Are we going to inform them prior to our annual meeting, or is that something we'll report while we're out there?
The document they already have, because I think they post it, right? They wanted kind of an update. Yeah.
I sent the update a few days ago. It was suggested that it be in by, I think, June 20th was the deadline, so I got it in before the deadline. And I believe they're going to share it with all of the other attendees at the annual conference, so we'll get the same report from the other states as well, which will be nice to see what everyone else is up.
Okay, good. So we'll have that on our when states give their brief update.
Yes, Roxana has printed a copy for all of you, and then excuse me, my allergies. Roxana has printed a copy for all of you that you can look at today. If you have anything you want to add or tweak, I can send them an updated version since the deadline hasn't approached yet. And then I'll also bring copies with me to the annual meeting in Detroit at the end of the month, so you'll have a fresh copy with you.
Great. Thank you.
Does this require a motion to bring it to the board for?
No.
I think we're in good shape, knowing that it's something that the full board knows that your applications then will never include those people waiting to test. We will just be submitting you those that are needing to be approved for the license for consideration.
Very good. Because
and the NCARB record is really good. For those that have the full record and are coming from another state, I'm able to review it, follow it through without any problem. So those that are really clear, you'll probably see my initials by it, knowing that I've reviewed it, now that I'm more comfortable with all of it. They provide a really thorough analysis of everything.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So it's been great.
appreciate you doing that.
Yeah, yeah.
Anything that can save you all time. Absolutely. So that's all I had. I wanted to make sure we were all on the same page, that Wanda carrying forward and Francis will be able to feel comfortable with that change and move forward.
Okay, I'm
Good.
I'm glad.
I'm thrilled.
Thank you.
Good, good.
I don't guess we need a motion for that.
Oh, I think-
Administrative, so, yeah.
And I'll bring those, if we've got a minute between this and the full board meeting, I'll make sure that we've all got the documents. Like Liz said, if you do find something that she's forgot, she did a great job putting it together. I think it even is going to help us internally with our training and making a few changes in our office. Good.
Thank you. Are there any other subjects, issues that we need to bring up, Frank, Brian, while we're here on the committee?
I was going to make an announcement at the AIA convention, but is
Yes,
this appropriate time
please.
for that?
Yes, yes.
So that's our state AIA convention is, and I think pretty sure I wouldn't be stealing the thunder from Ashley, but I think she's working remotely today. But it's July 22nd through the 25th, and I definitely encourage all of us to go if possible. And I think, Roxanne, that you're coming this year.
Yes.
You and Wanda and
Francis,
And
I think.
Francis.
She was wonderful at inviting us, and I said I thought it was very important for the three of us at least to go, and I know it's going to clash with Liz not being able to go. But we're planning, I think, on the 24th to be there. She
Okay.
looked at the curriculum, what made sense, so we'll probably be there most of the day. I'm very excited because it's in Franklin, am I correct?
Yep, it's
So that's
Franklin.
wonderful.
I think, although it'll be good for everybody to meet you, Roxanne. Wanda shows up on all the license, so I think everybody's like looking forward to meeting Wanda. So
That's a great
so
thing.
don't take that
Yes.
as a negative on you, but it's just that Wanda's going to be there.
Absolutely. Wanda is going to be there. That's our plan. Unless something comes up, the three of us will be there, and I'm very
Okay.
excited. Yes.
Well,
and
it'd be good to be an opportunity to just when asking questions and about everything, and you guys can, be right there to give one-on-one answers, and sometimes I think they just want to put a face with a name.
That's
so-
right. That's right.
Absolutely. I'm very
I'm
excited.
glad. I'm actually glad you guys are.
Outstanding, yeah.
We were talking about. I'm actually chairman of the convention this year.
Oh,
so just one more thing.
congratulations.
So,
Lucky you.
Lucky me.
So you had some inside contacts.
Just
to
a
get-
just
yeah.
a little hint.
Okay,
That was all.
all right.
Just a little. No, what is the suggestion?
Suggestion, very good. No, that's great that you'll be attending, because I know that the profession, all they get is, just what the board has done or doing, and they don't know anyone other than us,
I'm excited. And Ashley was great. She gave me the dates, everything, because she knew she wasn't coming. So we had a chance to go back and forth. So it'll be great.
Wanted to add to what Brian said, that is a double-edged sword, them knowing who you are. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Frank?
I don't have anything. I won't make the meeting. I've got cataract surgery that day, but that's good. I'll be able to see better.
Yeah. Well, good. I don't think we have any kind of application issues to discuss. No? Okay. Any other business? None?
No.
Well, I'd like to adjourn the meeting.
Sure.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We got it.
All right.
Meeting adjourned.
Thank you. We've got until 10 a.m. Thank you very much.
It's 5 till 10 Eastern.
Before I call this meeting to order, a notice of June the 13th, 14th, 2018 meeting of the Board of Architects and Engineering Examiners is posted on the Board of Architecture and Engineering Examiners website, and it was posted on June the 8th, 2018. I'd like to call this meeting to order, and we'll start with a roll call.
Susan Ballard.
Here.
Robert Campbell.
Here.
Ricky Bursai.
Here.
Grant Menchu.
Here.
Blair Parker.
Here.
Brian Tibbs.
Here.
Rick Thompson.
Here?
Frank Wagster.
Here.
Kathy Ware.
Here.
Alton Heathcote.
Grateful to be here in service.
Helps me. Stephen King.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you, Wanda. The first item that we have on our agenda is the April minutes. We need to approve the April minutes. Apparently, this is on page 3 of your iPad, if you haven't seen it. And I know that they were sent out earlier, so if everybody's had a chance to review that, we'll entertain a motion to approve the.
Make a motion that we approve the minutes as presented.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And we'll start out with the professional society reports.
Good morning. I am Casey Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of the American Council of Engineering Companies of Tennessee and the Tennessee Society of Professional Engineers. I'm also representing 2 of my colleagues, and I'll tell you that in a quick minute. But a quick update from the engineers of what's going on. We want to make sure you all are aware of the Tennessee Engineers Conference, which is a joint meeting of ACEC, TSPE, the American Society of Civil Engineers Tennessee section, and the Tennessee Structural Engineering Association. Those 4 groups will get together from September 16th through 18th. We've got 7 educational tracks during that time, and a couple of opportunities we'll have a big plenary speaker and a couple of bigger speakers when we're all together. There will be a luncheon for the foundation during that time, and we would also welcome an update from you all at some point in that. So logistically, I'd love some help figuring that out and what you might want to share with that group, because it's a good opportunity. The last couple of years, have had about 600 folks there. So it's a good opportunity to at least have an update, as y'all have done the last couple of years. And should anything be a topic that you'd really like some larger feedback about, I know we've done a town hall meeting the last couple of years on different issues. Happy to build that into the schedule too. I've got a little time blocked in case we decide we need to do that about something. So that'll be at the Franklin Marriott Cool Springs, September 16th through 18th, which is a Sunday to Tuesday. The main conference is Monday and Tuesday, so that's a change for us as well. Parking will be free, and the room rates are very reasonable. Our ACEC is having its Engineering Excellence Awards and a celebration gala of its 50th anniversary on Friday, October the 26th at the Omni Nashville Hotel. Y'all are welcome to attend and will be invited, and we think that that's just going to be a fabulous, glorious celebration. Excited about that. Project submittals are due and open to anyone on projects that were designed in Tennessee, regardless of where that project exists. And so those, we've extended that call for submittal, or initial submittal, until the 30th of this month, so you're welcome to still get at it. NSPE, the National Society of Professional Engineers, will have its Professional Engineering Conference July 20th to 23rd, and a board meeting at Caesars Palace in Vegas. You're all welcome to attend. ACEC's fall meeting will also be in Vegas at the Bellagio, October 28th through 31st. So if you're super Vegas motivated, you're welcome to join me and others. We're in the process of putting together our PE exam review. We will do that again this year. Last year, we tested a new system for the folks to access that remotely. We are working with Lipscomb, and Chris Gwaltney, who is typically here at this meeting representing ASCE. We've worked with Lipscomb to partner so that we physically do those courses and structure the same way we had in years past, where it goes through every different section of the PE exam on different nights with different instructors. But they've got a really high-tech system that has worked really well in terms of people taking that class remotely. And so we are expecting that this year we will broaden the capability of that and sort of advertise it a little bit heavier to those folks outside of Nashville, because it did work well. So that will be an option that will start. Typically, we do run that class starting 10 weeks prior to the exam, and they take that course every Monday night for 10 weeks for about 3 hours. And our success rate in terms of exam passes has been really good and strong, and the feedback on that course is, I think it just really helps people focus the way that they study somewhat and how they organize that material in their head. So that's coming up. Our leadership PE leadership PE course for this year's class. We'll graduate next week at a retreat, and excited about that. And we've got 2 board retreats coming up. Both ACAC and TSP have their board retreats in the next 2 weeks. One at Evans Mill in Smithville, the other at the Smokehouse in Mont Eagle. If you all have anything that you would like for them to know or help with, or if you've got any messages to send back, more than happy to take those. Shifting hats to Ashley Cates couldn't be with us today, so on behalf of AIA Tennessee and the architects, she's got 2 conferences she wanted to make sure you knew were in existence. One is the National AIA Conference in New York, June 21st to 23rd, so that's coming up pretty quickly. And the AIA Tennessee Convention, which is a great event, will be this year based out of the Franklin Marriott, but I think y'all are going a lot of places in Franklin because Franklin has some pretty cool architecturally things to do. That's certainly not how she would say that. That'll be July 22nd to 25th, so encourage you to attend that. And then on behalf of Nathan Ridley for the landscape architects, they had their chapter conference May 3rd and 4th at the Nelson Andrews Leadership Center on Percy Priest Lake. He was very pleased. They had over 200 people there, which I think was a really fantastic turnout for them. He also wanted to make sure that you all, I can't do it in the lovely way that he does, but he sent me a few paragraphs on the election and making sure you're aware that we are 7 weeks away from a very important election, the August 2nd primary, and that there are lots of shifts happening in state government, and just wants to make everyone aware that exists. And I'm not going to tell you the rest of the details because he just does it so much better than I do, and I'm sure he'll fill you in next time. Any questions? Yes, sir.
What was the date of the annual meeting? September 12th?
September 16th to 18th.
Okay.
16th is will be just board meetings, and we'll have an opening reception for folks that get in. We're going to start Monday morning fairly early. So, thanks. I'm going to let the interior designers give their own report today.
Yes. Thank you, Casey. I can't do as good as you, though. Don Baltimore, representing Tennessee Interior Design Education and Advocacy, which is abbreviated as Tennessee. We, the interior designers, I should say, my clients, are sort of taking a breather like everyone else after the legislature and absorbing what they did, looking at next year. And as Casey said, we're all in the middle of the elections. It looks like at this point there'll be at least 27 new legislators, which is a really high number. Hadn't been that. Present legislators are not reelected, then the number will be even higher. So it'll be an interesting group. The interior design groups, IIDA and ASID, will be holding statewide conventions in the fall. I don't have the exact dates with me, but also the interior designers have increased in their number of registrants in the last year, which shows the commitment of interior designers to education and training and the importance of registration. So that concludes my report, unless you have some questions.
Questions for Don? All right, thanks, Don.
Thank you.
I've noticed a couple of people have come in. If you would, if you're in the audience, stand up and introduce yourself so we know. Great. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I should introduce this. Jared has been with our department for some time, and we're very fortunate to have him join the legal team. He's going to anytime if you can't get one of us, Jared's always here too to help you out. So I hope you all get to know him and see what a resource us and to you through his service. So sorry, Jared, I should introduce you.
Thanks, sir. Moving on, the legal reports.
Yes.
Members of the board, our legal report today starts on page 11 of the materials on your iPad. I will get started. Our first entry today is 2018-018181. I was fortunate to have Rick Thompson's assistance on this complaint. This complaint came from, it regards a draftsman that worked for an architect since 1981. The complainant in this case was the former partner and ultimately the executor of the architect's estate. The complaint alleged that respondent has continued to hold himself out as a representative of that architecture firm after the architect passed away. The draftsman is not a licensed or registered architect in Tennessee. There's also allegations of misuse of funds and other internal business disputes that arose. When we look through the materials, the respondent doesn't list his title as architect, but rather in the foot of his emails, he still does have the name of this architecture firm in some of the communications that were submitted to us. The respondent indicated that the architect that supervised him suffered from brain cancer before passing away, unfortunately. And the illness had dramatically changed the architect's personality. He says that by the end of his time with us, that the architect was making a lot of allegations of misuse of funds and things like that. That stemmed from the fact that the draftsman, while working for this architect, did maintain his own business practices. And you can see through the documents that there were some of these projects that were the draftsman's clients, things like that, that the firm would supervise and facilitate, and others that were the firm's. And that started to get, it seemed to be between the parties, the delineation of what was paid, who was paid, started to break down. Obviously, as a result of this, the architect at the end of his life started making these allegations to the family members that are now the complainants in the case. The dispute is not, I've just recently received a letter. They say he's still holding himself out as a member of their firm, but I don't have any, I was not provided documents to see what they mean by that. And it doesn't appear at any point respondent indicated he was an architect or ever represented that he was, but rather that he was a member of this partnership. And so I wanted to turn it over to Rick to speak a little bit about it. I had Rick review this to make sure, give his expertise as far as the relationship between an architect and a draftsman.
Yes, I reviewed the complaint, and primarily the part where the draftsman had clients, he brought clients, previous clients, current clients, into the firm, and then the firm executed the work. The firm owner sealed the drawings, and the draftsman, from what I could glean, never represented himself as an architect. Now, their business was their business. How they conducted their financial arrangement, we really didn't get that much information, other than there were some allegations of fraud and direct payments, and I don't think there was enough information submitted really for me to understand that. So I looked at it from a perspective of, was the draftsman represented himself as an architect, and my findings were no, he wasn't. And after additional conversations, Sarah and I decided, or I recommended, that this probably is a civil matter, and we really don't have any jurisdiction over that financial issue. I found that in my findings, there's no representation of him being an architect. Now, if he's got contacts and relationships, we all have those. So I recommended that we dismiss or...
Correct. There was only one allegation that I thought fell squarely within our jurisdiction, but I believe there's a proof problem. One of the allegations from the family members is that the draftsman continued to use the seal of the architect after he passed away. There's nothing to indicate what the date of the sealing on that documents were. They point to a discrepancy in handwriting, and the respondent makes what I think is an argument that would be hard to overcome one way or the other, which is that as the architect disintegrated, his health deteriorated, that handwriting changed. And with him not being around, it would be very difficult to do anything about that. So exactly what Rick said, at this point we're recommending closure and to inform them that their better jurisdiction may be in a civil court.
I have a question, just for my own education. Is it not required that an architectural seal, like the engineers have, that they have to date it? I'm just curious.
I believe so, and I think that it was dated in a period, I can't remember exactly what the issue was. I'll take a look at it because I actually have my laptop. But I remember we ended up deciding that there wasn't something really to go on with the seal.
But you said you couldn't tell the date. I was just curious.
Yeah, I
Thank
can't
you.
remember if it was on like a letter or where it was. I can pull it up while I answer the other questions as well, though, and take a look.
I just wonder if it seems to be, I don't know whether we have anything that prohibits it or not, but it seems to be a little misleading if this individual is on his email claiming to be a part of a firm. And is the firm still in existence, or did the firm dissolve with the death of the architect?
Yeah, they are in the process of winding down the firm.
He could still be an employee of the firm working for other architects.
That goes to the heart of the dispute, which is
Okay.
that the draftsman believes that he is still an employee and that he is closing down his accounts so that clients aren't left abandoned, and that he is fulfilling that duty and rolling it off, and it continues to find a new architect and continue on in his business or retire. He's been at it a while, and the family wants him to pretty much have just to get out. And so there, when this title was used and how often seems to be a kind of a question, again, of an employment relationship, which could be addressed in civil court. I can pull up that.
Thank you.
Question?
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Kathy, just to go back to what you said, it looks like there was allegations of the seals being signed, but they were not provided. So we never actually physically saw the example.
Heard the report and the recommendation. Do I hear a motion?
With the recommendation to close?
Second that motion.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion? All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries.
Complaint number 2, 2018-020281, and dealing with a professional engineer. On this one, I had Robert Campbell assist me, and as you can see, I have an excerpt from his report because he said it better than I ever could. The complainant here alleged that respondent had performed an inaccurate inspection of the foundation of the home that he had built. The complainant noted that the building experienced cracking and other issues after construction. The respondent concluded in his report that the cracking was cosmetic and normal. But the complainant also made an allegation of lack of being biased because this respondent works quite frequently with the builder. So I sent the inspection and all the documents we received to Robert Campbell. You can see here an excerpt of his report. But Robert, if you'd like to talk a little bit about your review, I'd be happy for you to do that.
All right, thank you. What we have here is a PE basically wrote a report for a builder saying that that some of the cracks and things that it's a new home, we're noting were normal. New homes do settle, and that was normal, and it was nothing from a foundation standpoint. Subsequent to that, we had 2 foundation repair firms and 1 PE that went back and noted some substantial settlement that was a differential type settlement. This house appeared to be torquing, for lack of a better word. It was it sloped this way and back towards the right corner. So it almost looked like it was doing this towards the back corner. And they had levels with rulers, to show the floors, and some cracks that were there, horizontal cracks in the sheetrock, not vertical ones. There were horizontal cracks. So again, that tended to look to me like it was being twisted. The first PE, the one that the allegation is made against, said this is normal, don't worry about it. There's an allegation that he had a pretty cozy relationship with the builder. I didn't get into that because, again, that's a very difficult thing to prove, whether he did or not. However, I did find several things in his report that would cause me to worry. The first one was when he stamped his report, he signed it here and he put his seal over here, and with unstamped. So if you're going to put a stamp on it, do it the right way. Put your name through it, put the date through it. So I thought that was, that's a violation of our seals law. And I mean, that's a letter of caution thing. That's, to me, was nothing. I believe that's, Sarah, correct me if I'm making sure I'm putting everything down here right. But the second thing was in his report, he basically said that was normal, without saying, let's come back and monitor this in 6 months, or let's come back and look. You know, anytime you see some sort of settlement in a house or cracking, just to raise your hand and say, oh, that's normal, especially with a new house, is kind of foolhardy. I mean, it really is, because we do know that new houses do settle some, and we do know that you have some separation from like a stoop or something that'll happen, or a driveway. But he never said that. He said, everything's fine, don't worry about it, go on. Well, he's hit where I think he was lacking was in the proper conduct of practice and service in areas of competence. He should have made the report more complete. He should have had it to where there was a follow-up, and there was some way to go back and check this. And so for that reason, I found the things I've put in here, and I'm losing my page now. Yeah, 750. I'm sorry, I'm looking at 3 pages. Civil penalty in amount of $750 for incompetence under the rule 0120-02-.03, and have the respondent take and pass the law and rules exam. It's a sloppy report, and as a homeowner, I think everything's fine, and it's not. So anyway, I hope I didn't butcher that as bad as I think I did.
Thank you, Robert. I think you did a great job. Another recommendation.
Thanks for lying.
Yeah. So I'm paid to do that for you. So, but and additionally, we recommended a letter of caution regarding that seal. I think at our last meeting on some of our seal issues, we had gone to a letter to kind of show them the proper form, and so we included that as well from Robert's recommendation. So is there any?
How old is the house?
It's a brand new house, and that's
Months?
Yeah, I mean, it looked like, I couldn't tell exactly, but it was months. I mean, you know, maybe even a few weeks when he made his initial report. But it was a new house that had obviously not gone through some sort of, and there was there is a drainage easement on the right side of the house, the same side of the house that the settling was occurring. You know, how was that compacted? There was no records. He didn't even mention, oh, we've got compaction records in this, along this easement, or any. I mean, there was nothing along those lines. And again, his report, as stated, was probably accurate. The cracks didn't look to me to be, the first set of cracks were not, you look at them, okay, yeah, there's a few across the lintel on the garage, and, you know, which are small cracks. And sometimes that happens because you got a metal lintel and a, brick with mortar that kind of start to, they were small. But he never in his report said, this is a new house, we're still going to come back and look at this in a little bit because we are seeing some cracking, and maybe it's a little too early for some of that.
Did he recommend that the cracks be fixed?
He just said they were cosmetic. He said they could be.
He just said live with it?
Well, I think on one of the cracks, he said that one of them was, a couple of them were workmanship cracks, maybe from, sheetrock, the shrinkage and stuff that you see when you turn on new HVAC systems. Sometimes it'll cause some expansion and contraction on your joints. And I don't have the entire complaint in front of me, Kathy, to answer that question, but he basically said they were all cosmetic, and there was no foundation or structural issue.
Did he acknowledge the differential settlement?
No, because it had not manifested itself. Although there were some doors that wouldn't open, he attributed that to poor workmanship.
The only place he notes anything like that is in his final conclusion. He says has possibly been some slight shifting of the footing on the right side of the living room.
I'm glad you pointed that out.
But I agree with Robert. That's where he addresses that.
In the body of his report, did he say if he did any subsurface investigation? Did he do any digging or probe hole? Nothing?
No, man.
No
He didn't say I got a probe rod out and
he just looked at the cracks.
He just looked at the
visual
cracks.
Visual assessment. Okay.
Took a few pictures of them. And again, when you look at the cracks, you look and go, his report sort of kind of made some sense, but there was no real investigation. And then I'm glad you pointed out, he did say it appears that it shifted a little bit. Well, if you put that in your report, to me, you should, that's what kind of flagged me. So you should have said, hey, if it's shifting now, we're going to go back and look at it a little bit later to see. So.
And to your other question, he does indicate that they could be patched and repaired. It says cracks in the bricks can be patched and window recalked, and then he says elsewhere that it can be, something can be removed and patched. So the old drywall compound can be cleaned and repatched. So he does indicate repair can be made, but going back to the cosmetic, obviously.
I've got a question. First of all, this engineer that did the report did no design on the project, correct?
Correct. He was just an inspecting.
Okay. And the part of the complaint is that the owner or whoever is saying that him and the contractor are buddies.
Some kind of had some sort of relation.
Yeah.
And he may have designed the subdivision or something, Frank. It's not obvious that he did.
In his report, did he make any notation that there was like a conflict of interest?
No, because, and again, I didn't go into that because I don't know how we prove that exactly. I mean, you know, maybe they've done 100 jobs together. We could have probably asked that piece of information. I don't know, but the complaint never said they've done a lot of work together. They just said they were covering for him in lack of a.
Robert, I'm assuming he was compensated for this professional opinion?
I'm confident he was, yeah. It didn't mention that either in any of the complaint documents.
I have one more question. What was the construction value of the house generally? And how big was it? Do you know?
Probably 1,500 square
1,500
feet.
square feet.
It was a slab rancher type. I mean, it was a little bit more than a slab rancher, but it was it's probably 1,500 square feet. It didn't look to be, but it was on a slab. I mean, that was.
And was it part of a development? Is it a PUD?
It appeared to no. It was. It appeared to be. It was a standalone house. So it was a single structure. So it wasn't connected to. I mean, it wasn't a duplex or something like that.
Other questions? You've heard the report. Do I hear a motion on this case?
I'll make a motion to accept the recommendation of the engineer reviewer.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion? There being no other discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Third case, 2018-022381, involves a professional engineer. This did not have a reviewer. This is a self-reported practice of engineering while on expired registration. The respondent stated in March of 2018, while creating a website, he looked up his own licensing information and discovered he had let it lapse in August. Respondent states that he believed he confused paying his privilege tax with the license renewal, and he did immediately take steps to reactivate his license and self-report the lapse. And so for that reason, I recommended our usual $500 for practice on expired.
Sarah, has he in fact renewed his license?
His application was pending when I last talked to Wanda, and I believe the intention was it was going to be approved.
Sarah, is this $500 penalty consistent with previous?
Yes, it seems to be that
penalties?
we're kind of, regardless of number of projects, we've come to this $500 amount unless there's some sort of extraordinary circumstance.
I guess, and again, it may be in here, but did he continue to practice unexpired?
When he figured out he had lapsed, he claims he stopped, and when they execute an affidavit with us, they agree to do that as well. And then they tell us about the scope of projects they had. So at this point, we don't have evidence that he did that.
Discussion. I'd like to entertain a motion on this case.
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Case And if you will indulge me, I might read this one almost directly because of the dates and complexity. 2018-026571. This has to do with a professional engineer. This engineer has been suspended with us since August of 2018. His license was put in a suspended status. You can see there the disciplinary history, but I talk about that in greater detail in the description. In 2009 is when we first became aware of this licensee's issues. Missouri had declined disciplined respondent with a 5-year probation status due to practicing engineering beyond what is considered incidental and necessary to engineering that the respondent had performed. In 2013 in Missouri, respondent then failed to timely renew his license, which was an express condition of his probation, which resulted in the probation being extended. In 2014, Kansas disciplined the respondent with a probationary period after finding respondent had sealed fire drawings with deficiencies rising to the level of incompetence and misconduct on a number of projects. Due to the discipline in Kansas with the fire drawings, Missouri, where he was on probation, revoked his license. As a result of all of that, Tennessee first placed respondent in probation in 2013. Upon the violation of probation in Missouri, where he didn't renew, and the probation in Kansas, Tennessee suspended respondent's license, and it's supposed to be suspended until August of 2018. So he's been suspended since 2013. He's supposed to be due in 2 months. In March of 2018, respondent was disciplined in Oklahoma. Respondent had been suspended in Oklahoma due to all of this. Because as you can imagine, he was licensed, I think, in over 40 jurisdictions, and it was quite the onslaught of reciprocal discipline. I have Excel charts to attempt to track it. But Oklahoma, he got in trouble in Oklahoma due to misconduct. But the Oklahoma board ultimately denied his attempt to reapply for an active license because of the Kansas fire drawings. So he was suspended and then ultimately denied a renewal from the 2 different incidents. After that, so now he's not licensed in Oklahoma, Oklahoma learned that respondent and his firm were reviewing plans and having an employee of his firm with an Oklahoma engineering registration seal plans. Additionally, respondent's firm's certificate of authorization was inactive in Oklahoma due to non-renewal, and the firm and respondent were each assessed a $10,000 civil penalty and a 5-year suspension. After that, as you can imagine, many of these jurisdictions have moved forward on revocation actions and other things, and that is my recommendation here. It's just, at this point, I think that we need to authorize the voluntary revocation of respondent's license due to noncompliance with other states' discipline. As I list these aggravating factors, but as you can see, I think we've given quite a few opportunities here to get in compliance, and it's just not happening.
Sarah, define voluntary revocation.
Excuse me.
I'm sorry.
That's how we're doing it now. Okay.
I defer to the chair on which question I should answer.
Since Alton has already spoken.
No, I absolutely.
I surrender the floor to you, sir. This time.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Can you define, is there an alternative to voluntary? Define voluntary?
Absolutely. So we start here, right? So basically I send a letter that says, we're going to revoke your license. Would you like to give it up now before we go to a hearing? If he says no, then I take it away involuntarily or attempt to. That would be up to you.
And
yes.
I apologize for my violation of the protocols.
You're out of practice, that's all. So just a question, of the $10,000 civil penalty, that is strictly from Oklahoma.
That is Oklahoma, and
Okay,
they went.
so we don't have any financial penalty other than.
No,
okay.
I didn't go for a financial penalty. Typically, I don't like to combine them, just because you're losing the teeth that you would use to collect.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
I think they went for financial because the firm didn't have a license to go after. It had lapsed, so they went for money.
And this may be exactly what you told Alton. I reckon the word voluntary, this seems like we're kind of giving him an option to get, I mean, I know he's getting out with loss of license, but it's almost like we ought to cease and desist and we're going to take your license regardless. But we don't have that option, though, do we?
No, these recommendations are always for the settlement period. When we go to a formal hearing, I will usually go for the full statutorily authorized, whatever that is. When I come before you in a formal hearing, it's going to look a lot meaner than the recommendations, for lack of better words. So this is just so we don't have to pay the money to have the hearing. You can just give it up. But you're right. but you're right.
Well, I mean, and let me ask this. This is something for the board, and it doesn't something to think about. What if we see a situation that's so bad that we think that person, if they practice another day, is a risk to the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens of Tennessee? Do we have the option to tell them? I mean, do we immediately to stop, and if you do anything else, we'll send. Well, I'm just asking because I don't know.
Yes, we do. We have there's two different ways we do that. It's encompassed in the Uniform Administrative Procedures Act, and the process that you're referring to is we call it summary suspension. And so there's two different routes. The board can, upon finding of a health, safety, and welfare risk to the public, they can that day immediately suspend the license of that respondent, and then they are afforded an opportunity for a hearing within a reasonable amount of time. And you also get an initial consideration of the suspension within 7 to 10 days. I apologize, I don't remember the number. And then after that, so you can suspend, and then within a week or so, you have a hearing on whether that suspension is justified, and then after however that turns out, then we go down the road, we have a big hearing, for the actual facts. The other way is you can give them set a date where they show up and basically do it all in one day, so they can argue against you. They'll stay active for 7 to 10 days, show up at the hearing, have a hearing on it, and then suspend that day, to be followed by a hearing for a revocation. So
it's
you're
kind of
right.
like a restraining order.
Correct.
It happens immediately.
Precisely.
And then they get the opportunity to prove. Okay, that's good.
Yes.
This seems like one of those cases we ought to just tell him immediately.
Normally I would, but when it's reciprocal, we don't tend to go there.
Okay.
If it was here, I would be. That's
I'm
what
with
we'd be
you.
doing
With
today.
Any other questions? You've heard the legal report. Do we have a motion on this case?
Make a motion to approve the action of voluntary revocation.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Case 5, 2018-029271. This is a professional engineer that self-reported for practice on expired registration. They have applied to get that repaired and renewed. Respondent's license expired in August of 2017. The respondent wanted to apologize, wanted me to express an apology to you all, and he emphasizes that he's not using this as an excuse, but his business partner, who's also his brother-in-law, battled and ultimately succumbed to leukemia during that lapse period. So there was a lot of business and personal upheaval, and he just missed it. So he wanted me to relay that, but also emphasize he's not using that as an excuse and understands his duties. For that, $500 standard operating on an expired registration. You want to consider that mitigating circumstance, or however you all feel.
Everybody has heard the report. Do we have a motion on this?
I'll make a motion that we accept the recommendation of a $500 fine.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Yeah, I have a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion? There being no other discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Number 6, 2018-020581. This is an allegation of possible unlicensed practice. A complainant in this. I apologize. There's actually a typo. That second sentence should say respondent. Complainant that filed this is a licensee against a respondent who is a designer and a graduate of an architect and design program. I did it all over in here. I apologize. Respondent owns her own business and does residential design and home interiors. The complainant in this case is licensed and who had a client come to him and say that they had to end a project due to the respondent not being able to seal plans and that it ended up costing them time and money. Out of an abundance of caution, the complainant filed this complaint against the respondent for the possible going beyond what this designer would be allowed to do without being registered as an architect. legal, we conducted an investigation. I went out, I wanted to see what are your contracts, what are your clients, what was this project. During the investigation, the complainant explained that that this was, they expressed concern. They did not intend it to be, I think they were shocked to see kind of the response from my office as far as inquiry. And so they wanted to emphasize that they've had a long-term, that the complainant and respondent have actually had quite a long-term working relationship, that they've never had any issues, but they didn't feel like the client at issue would have said anything, and so they just felt that they had a duty to the board. Despite that, they were cooperative and helped us out. We looked into the project. It turns out the client that had the issue had hired our respondent designer to renovate a house. And then ultimately, through the project that was going on for quite a while, a lot of change orders, he ultimately purchased the property next door and decided to convert both properties into his house/law office. At that point, the designer said, this is beyond the scope of what I'm capable of doing, provided a recommendation to an architecture firm that she works with quite frequently. They ended up going out and pricing it with the complainant and got a better deal, and ultimately let go of the respondent designer here. And so everything I can indicate, the only thing that stuck out was in one of her design, in her designed website, in one place, kind of what, just decoratively, it says, kind of like amongst flowers, it says architect. And she has had that changed to architecture, interior architecture. So, and she said she wasn't aware that she uses a program. So all of that to say, it appears that this is an educated designer that understands pretty clearly from my conversations with her what her restrictions are. All of her projects are entirely residential, and that she has multiple ongoing relationships with registered architects that she utilizes quite frequently in the community because she understands the limitations that she has. And she had, as soon as I pointed out that header on her website, she had that corrected and apologized. And it wasn't related to her title, but rather just kind of floating amongst a field of flowers. So for the mitigating factors, I said that the complainant did not wish to cooperate beyond what has already happened for, I think we all understand business relationships. The respondent quickly remedied the possible misleading use of architect, and the projects identified were all small residential projects and projects falling under the exemptions for our statute for registration. So for all of this, I recommended closure.
Okay, Susan.
Would you repeat what you said about interior architecture? Because that's not a licensed profession.
Right.
It is not a recognized profession.
Right.
So why did she change it to that?
She changed it to architecture or something and emphasized that she does interior work throughout her.
And that doesn't need to be on her website at all, because she's not a licensee. So.
The statute allows you to say you do architecture. You just cannot say you are an architect. And that is the odd distinction that we make. So I agree with you. We don't recognize that as a profession, which is more reason we don't have authority to do anything about it, unfortunately. So she never represents herself as an architect, but you can say you do architecture if it falls within the exception. I know it took me a long time to fully understand that. In fact, I have issued discipline incorrectly and had to retract it because of my same misunderstanding. I totally understand that confusion.
Let me understand this. You can say you, lack of a better term, do architecture.
That's correct. Because you can do architecture for homes under certain square footage for certain purposes. You can perform, but the statute says you cannot use the title architect or an appellation of that would imply that you are a licensed architect. So there has been argument that should include architecture, but that has ultimately been an overextension, has been found to be an overextension of the statute, because you can perform architecture without being an architect. Yes.
I guess the other thing is,
sorry.
and this is just a complaint of all these interior design schools now calling themselves interior architecture. It sounds like it's starting to bleed over into people think there is such.
Yes, and I know from our conferences that it's a hot topic. This particular licensee also went through an actual architecture program, but she is a designer by trade.
Excuse me. So she graduated in architecture, but she practices interior design.
Yes, she practices residential architecture,
right.
And then does design work, correct.
But she has a degree in architecture?
Yes.
Okay, but she hasn't taken the exam?
No.
dumb thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Stephen?
Trying to look at the section I think you're referring to, and it's 62-2-102.
Yes, and
And
103.
the last section of that sentence says or, not and. So why would you conclude that one could use the word engineering or architecture? Still seems to be a violation of the Title Act to me.
Because if you look the way it reads, it says you cannot use the appellation of architect. You're right, modifies or qualifies the word architecture, engineering, or landscape architect. So it's not related to the actual term. It's talking about a title that is modifying or qualifying architecture. So some of the things for example, when we see tire engineering and things like that, then we're looking at, does adding a word that's technical to architecture make you look as if you are licensed? And I don't recall, and I can look it up, that we may have an AG opinion on it. I'm not 100% sure. I can check that. And if it's something
we had an opinion about tire engineer because I guess the company asked for it. But
I have multiple complaints on them.
And I understand that one. But when you have an individual that portrays to the public that they're involved in engineering or architecture, it seems to me that the public would likely assume that they might be a registrant of the board.
That is, if the board wants to make that finding, you can do that. And I wish I had better access now to my understanding of why we have not done that. But if that's something you want, I'm happy to take some time, research, and pull together kind of our authority on architecture and engineering versus architect and engineer. I don't want to make a political statement of any kind, but I just with the temperature of everything right now is that we kind of I've been taking a more conservative approach to my recommendations on title misuse, just because of things, So.
Blair?
So in my world of landscape architecture, I'm a licensed landscape architect, but in theory, by what you are saying, I understand that a firm can claim that they provide landscape architecture, but not necessarily have a licensed landscape architect within?
Yes.
Wow.
There's room here to say that if you believe that the fact specific use is misleading to the public and it would lead the public to assume they're licensed, it is something that we can look at. It's just keeping in mind that the statute exempts particular forms of architecture and engineering out of the license. And so it really focuses on architect, engineer, landscape architect, and then appellations that qualify the practice areas, not necessarily the use of the term of the practice area.
But I do wonder how you can practice landscape architecture if you're not a landscape architect. How can you practice architecture if you're not an architect?
If it's exempt from being required to be registered. Now I understand what you're saying, which is like, well, we wouldn't consider that architecture, but the statute does in some ways. It doesn't say that it's not. It's it's unlawful for any person other than a registered architect or engineer to prepare plans except these things that, and when you read it that way, you're understanding that these are things we're exempting because they are architecture, they are engineering as a practice, but we're saying you don't have to be a licensee to do them. And so this statute implies these are engineering, but we're going to say, or architecture, but we're going to say that people can do them without being registered. And so that's kind of the implication. And it goes back kind of to the complexity of definitions, and I hate to go there, but that's, yeah.
So what I think I'm hearing from the board, Sarah, and I know you're kind of held by what the statute says, and I appreciate that. But I think there's enough concern on the way that use is in there, whether it be architecture or engineering, that we might want to revisit this on some level to get some clarification. And again, not trying to convolute it with the tire engineering thing. I mean, you've got software architecture. They all say it's the architecture of the software setup or the architecture of which we kind of take to mean not architect work, but how it's fits together. But in this case, where there is no real degree of separation between what somebody's doing and the practice of a profession, it seems that there needs to be a little bit more clarity, because I think the public is probably at some level of risk. And this is a situation where I don't think that's necessarily the case, but what if this person had gone on and said, and tried to do a house design or a whatever, and the public would say, well, you've got architecture in your name, so surely you can do that. And they said, well, sure I can. My dad was a builder, surely I can do that. So I think there's enough concern on the board level from what I'm hearing that we probably ought to revisit that on some sort of solution level, or see if there's any way we can make that a little bit
Sure.
more protective to the public.
I would be happy to, for our next meeting, produce a memorandum kind of going over not only the statutes, the rules, but I'll look for any Attorney General's opinions we have and look at some of our older cases and things that we've done and compile a document for you all to kind of go through the history, what we do, and I'll also take a look at some of our neighboring states, produce something for you all that would be comprehensive and go into it, and that way we can take a better look. And if you'd like on this case, we can defer it to the next meeting and just hold off on making a choice. I defer to you all, but definitely happy to do the memorandum.
I think just from what I'm hearing from the board, that would probably be a pretty good exercise for us to go through to make sure, because I'm confident I practice architecture, but it's usually with using profanity against them, so I'm not sure. Profane architecture.
We do have a case here that we've been listening to also. And so, do you want to defer this? I'm not sure I see a need, but, or do I hear a motion?
I'll make a motion that we accept the recommendation of council. Or you didn't make one? You recommend close?
Yes, ma'am.
I recommend we accept the recommendation of council.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second that as well.
We have a motion and a second. Rick?
I need to recuse myself. I became aware of this about 2 weeks ago, and I know the individuals, so thank you.
Any other discussion? There being none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
One opposed.
Number 7, there's quite a few complaint numbers here, and unfortunately, we're kind of going back to similar territory here. And I thank you, Ricky. Ricky looked at this one with me to kind of help me out. So this was complainant here is a licensee alleging that the respondents collectively, these are all individuals that work for a very large property management company that's national in scale. The complainant pointed out that these employees and their employer allow them to call themselves engineers without any registrations or licenses. They go by a multitude of variations, but they're all about their chief engineer, chief building engineer, mobile engineer, and assistant chief engineer. General counsel for the respondent's employer responded and explained that these respondents are all maintenance and facilities operations positions. These are usually large residential tenant buildings that they're maintaining, the equipment on, things like that. I was able to confirm that by pulling from their website job descriptions for these different jobs, and they also put out a marketing PR YouTube video where they followed one of these individuals around to show what they did. So we really got to see exactly what these folks do for a living, and that is correct. It's definitely more of what you think of a maintenance employee in a building. Sometimes that can be complex depending on the building, obviously, but they're not designing typically anything unless that was to assist in installation of a new product, would be my guess. Legal counsel investigated also the term of the use engineer in the context of this position. One of the arguments was that this was an industry use. And I did confirm multiple large companies did seem to have listings for this title in relation to these job descriptions. I recommended discussion. This is one of those instances where it's not as easy, in my opinion. Obviously, there seems to be jurisdictions that differ from me on tire engineering. It doesn't seem as clear as that. And so, Ricky, if you wouldn't mind speaking kind of on your conclusions, that would be great.
Yeah, we all know it's not unusual for property management companies and maintenance organizations to call someone a building engineer who is not a licensed engineer. That's pretty I think, standard from what I see. And I think it would be tough for us to say, don't use the title engineer, because there's just the sheer number of that occurring throughout the country is a little bit overwhelming. However, what we're after is to protect the public from, thinking somebody is a licensed engineer. And in this case, maybe in an apartment complex, there's not really a danger there. But when you say a high rise, if you've got somebody who is maintaining a high rise, that might be confusing for somebody to be referring to themselves as an engineer. So how I responded to Sarah is maybe there's a middle ground where the board can take a position that within the company, it's sort of like the world of industry. People in industry can call themselves, a line engineer or whatever, production engineer, and they're not licensed. They just can't print a business card that says engineer on it. Or I think we've ruled that in the past. They need to really leave engineer off of a business card if they're dealing with the public or a potential client. And maybe we can take a position like that where they can, within the property management company, they can use that title for their levels of jobs. They can maybe they have it on an office door, but when they're preparing a request for proposal to manage a property, they should not use resumes that call people engineers. Probably shouldn't have that on a business card that could be handed out to somebody outside of the company, or some considerations like that where anybody outside the company wouldn't think, because that could, if you're responding to a RFP for managing a facility, that might be something that the building owner might think is a plus if they think the person running my building is a licensed engineer. So anyway, that was my thought, that we could take some position there. I don't know if I'm ready to make a recommendation.
I struggled that with my
discussion was the goal, but I can make one if that sounded perfect to everybody.
Robert?
I think that's been kind of our litmus test. As long as there's no interaction with the public, they can call themselves whatever they want behind closed doors. But as soon as there is an interface with the public, then that term engineer needs to be used, or architect needs to be used in its strictest sense, because you do open up a lot of confusion. And in this case, it doesn't look like or maybe they did. Did they in marketing brochures to something that the public could have access to, did they call themselves these titles, or was that what they had on their door inside the facility?
I think wasn't it on this website, the little video?
It is, and it's on their cards.
Yeah.
It's their title,
Yeah.
functionally. So any place that they would be referred to, it's going to say chief engineer or building engineer. On LinkedIn pages, I think, is the main thing that was sent to us, but like I said, it's even the job description on their website.
Right. Kathy, I think you were next.
I feel pretty strongly about this one. I think that they should not be allowed to use the title. We just went through this discussion. It's a title act. That's what it regulates, is the use of titles. And I'll just give I think that there's no greater interaction with the public than these multifamily apartment complexes where, frankly, a lot of young people and other people who may not know the difference between what constitutes an engineer and what is not an engineer live, and they call the maintenance office and they say, I smell gas. And the response is, because this happened, so I must say this happened to my daughter. So she was living in an apartment complex 3 years ago, and she called me and told me about this, and she said, well, I thought I smelled gas, so I called the building. They said they'd send the building engineer. And I said, get out of the apartment. And I later on, I said, so who was this building engineer? And she said, I don't know. He had a lot of keys. That's usually the building engineer. So I think that it is very misleading. Now, I'll say that this daughter of mine had an engineering degree at the time. She should have known better. But I think that there's actually no greater responsibility to the public than these people who are walking around interacting with building occupants who are not in the construction industry. If you are a contractor and you tell your engineers when they go to see their clients, well, tell them you're the project engineer. And that client is in the construction business, and he knows that that doesn't mean that that contract employee is an engineer. It means that he's the guy to call and yell at if he doesn't get what he wants. But the public, if you say, I'm the building engineer, they say, engineer, credibility, good, I'm safe. So I'm very much opposed to it. I would say that this is something we need to take quite seriously.
Alton?
I'm familiar with a similar case here in Nashville, and this property manager actually does building inspections for other multifamily residential developments, and members inside that organization actually go out and do physical inspections of these complexes, would make recommendations about repairs, both engineering and architectural. And I'm like Kathy, I share that concern. They do not have the education or the exam nor the experience to be able to make recommendations, I think, particularly in multifamily housing complexes. And I believe, too, and I think, Kathy, you didn't say this, but I think this could be and could have a pretty significant effect on the public's health and safety. All of the residents that are part of these complexes and that are subject to the improvements made by non-licensed professionals in the complexes. And I realize this is a big task; it's a big undertaking, and but the fact that it's an industrial standard in their industry shouldn't exempt them from having to comply with the law.
I guess my own experience is usually like with a hospital engineering group or especially in industrial situations where you go down the hallway and everybody's an engineer of some kind. And just personally, my wife will say, do you know so-and-so? And I go, well, no. And she says her husband's an engineer. Not a registered engineer by any means. So it is confusing. I guess the problem that I see is it's so prevalent. How do you police it or without some state issue, some mandate that everybody that calls themselves an engineer that's not cease and desist? I mean, how do you actually approach it? Or is it an individual type thing? You just find it, if you don't like it, you turn them in. Or Stephen?
Well, I think we just, to answer your or comment on your point, I think we just deal with it as it comes along. We're not trying to make battles, but when something comes before us and we're asked, I think we gotta say what we think, and we think it's wrong, and we shouldn't allow it. But I do have one. I think, Ricky, your recommendation was to note in some sort of correspondence that it's okay to use the title internally. It may be, but I don't think we ought to say that. Our responsibility is to deal with the safety and welfare of the public. So I think our response should be what you do when you deal with the public. I don't even want to condone it internally. We probably don't have anything that says we can do that, but we don't have to okay it either.
And this is just to help, and it goes, I think, to what you're saying, Mr. King. I just wanted to make, so I think that a lot of folks don't know this, but we have an internal industrial exception in our statute. So it basically said that you can use the title engineer, architect, landscape architect, appellation thereof, so long as it is internal and not public facing. But I agree, I think that Kathy nailed it here, that this is obviously a public facing thing, and these are not, and it's not an industrial setting. But just for some of our newest members, if you didn't realize that, 62-103, Section 4 talks about that if you have any interest in that area. 62-2.
Robert.
Yeah, and I think that's what I was getting at earlier, is that it does allow that for inside the confines, but then what Ricky said is that it's on LinkedIn pages, it's on other things that do interface with the public, so that the public would, again, if it's on somebody's door in a facility somewhere that the public's not really got access to me, that's one thing. But when you start putting it on LinkedIn pages, when you start putting it on business cards, what's the purpose of a business card? It's to give out to somebody, right? A LinkedIn page, it's to give out to somebody. So to me, that changes the dynamic of this, because of what you just read. It's no longer an internal use of the title. It now becomes an external use of the title. And I'm with what Kathy said as well. But we have to understand that's what our rule says too, about being internal versus external. But in today's media, the line between internal and external is so, I mean, you put it on a website and the whole world sees it, and now the public sees it, whereas before you had on a piece of marketing brochure that you would just give to one person. Sorry to make you mad, Brian.
That's one way to get my attention, right?
That meant stop. I got the hint.
Do that
I'm
more
sorry.
often, buddy.
Just to make sure I clarify, I mean, I actually totally agree with it, but kind of back to what we were talking about earlier about the architect thing, software architect, we haven't been able to stop them, so when it's, can somebody just do the distinction between that? I mean, like, if you're calling yourself a, I'm going to use that, mobile engineer, whatever that could be, so how do we distinguish it between someone calling a software architect, for instance?
I think I don't know if I'm answering this correctly, but it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is anytime you believe the title architect, engineer, landscape architect, if those are being used in a way that would lead the public to believe that title applies to that person, it's problematic. You can say that you work in software engineering if you believe that appellation doesn't imply registration. And like I said, you can say that you do architecture so long as you don't put a word with it that implies registration. So you can't say, I do registered architecture. That's going to be problematic. You can say you do architecture, but as soon as you add that first word that implies registration, that's when the Title Act kicks in. And kind of going back to that, there's even a sentence that says, or gives or is designed to give the impression that the person using those words is an architect, which implies that people can use the words, so long as it doesn't imply registration. But you're right. It's a gray area, which is why I tagged in Ricky to put him on the spot to help me.
Oh, we've landed up Alden's first, I believe.
I think in the previous case where the person was practicing architecture that had the degree, and I may get this wrong, and I apologize if I do, but I thought it was anything below 5,000 square feet or less than 3 stories didn't necessarily require the licensure. And if I understood correctly, in that case, this individual was not performing design on structures that would require licensure. In this case, and I don't know all of the specific data, what services they're actually providing out in the public, but they are providing services to multifamily housing. And typically those structures are larger than 5,000 square feet and or taller than 3 stories and would typically require licensure. Again, the fact that I don't know what these people were doing, but I know what others in that industry and parallel to this complaint are doing, and they're actually doing inspections and making recommendations for modifications and improvements that to me constitute a practice that would normally require licensure. And I think, as Steve said, we have an obligation as a board, when it's called to our attention, to advise them this is violating state statutes.
maybe also, Brian, that I hate trusting my memory, but I believe 2 or 3 years ago there was somebody who had software engineering on a card and they were not registered, and so we wrote a letter and asked them to take off of that business card and off of a website, because there is until recently that was a discipline that you could be registered in. That was one of the disciplines you. We have not pursued cases where the public wouldn't be deceived, as we've talked about, like sandwich engineer or sandwich architect or whatever. There's no building engineer is too close to what we do. I mean, that is in the realm of what a professional engineer would do, is to operate a building. I like Steve's suggestion that we deal with what comes before us. It seems like that's really what we can do. And I also wonder whether this is a good topic for our next board newsletter, in that I think the board newsletter goes to more than just registered engineers. I think we send out to industry types and clients and that sort of thing, and that would be just one way to get the word out. And if I haven't heard us in a couple of meetings say this would be a good topic for the next board newsletter, so I just felt like it was time to say that would be a good topic.
Sure.
Kathy.
I don't want to monopolize as everybody else had a chance. So I just want to ask a question and show my ignorance on what is the actual standard penalty for practicing or using the title without proper licensure. In other words, for each of these individuals.
Each of these individuals, we have done $500 in the past. We've also done letters if we felt that would bring about compliance. And so $500 usually is our minimum penalty. But that's typically been the case unless it was in use or in conjunction with practice. I think I think Alton makes a good point that there probably is some dabbling into engineering, perhaps a going here, but that is not the allegation before us. It's really title. So $500 has been typical per instance, but so has a compliance plan or something like that. So that's the way I have had it come before me.
I'd like to make a motion. Well, I'm sorry. You want more discussion? Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Hospitality design industry, every hotel has an engineering department. They handle plumbing, any electrical, any HVAC. I don't know that we can regulate. I'm not disagreeing with what y'all are saying. It goes back to what happened in the last case. It's across the board. And I don't know it's a battle we can go into by ourselves. I think it needs to be something we'd have to bring other boards in, as far as general contractors or all the rest of them. So if we're going to start this battle, then we need to have a game plan. And one case at a time, might be all that we can handle without a game plan. Something I think we'd have to plan in our retreat and decide how we're going to address it.
We've been having discussion. Do we have a motion on this?
Motion. We don't have a recommendation. Does the recommendation to assess a penalty against each one of these for $750 or $500? I mean, what's the? Excuse me, Alton. You want to talk?
I was going to offer an alternative to that before we started talking about issuing civil penalties or fines, is because they may not be aware of the statute. Could we issue something like a letter of instruction counseling them on the use of the title and the application of the title?
Yes, and that was something I was thinking, was maybe we could do a letter to close out this complaint, but in addition, it may be worthwhile for us to set up an internal conference with their general counsel to talk about the approach. And I say that only because the general counsel, it seems to be aware of the statute, but was quite aggressively unsure how it applied. I think that they really didn't understand why in the world we'd even entertain requiring a response on it. So I think a letter is a great way to address it, but kind of going to exactly what Ms. Ballard said, it may be worth to start sitting at the table and getting the impressions of these folks of how they feel and what they're seeing in other jurisdictions.
I mean, I agree that I think a fine is problematic at this point because it's every single building. I think every single building has somebody in it called an engineer who's not an engineer. And to assess people a $500 fine just doesn't feel right to me. But a letter, I've seen nothing wrong with issuing a letter now to the people who are in front of us of instruction and education, and talk about it at the retreat about what big picture, so that we're dealing with what's in front of us now, but big picture, it's an issue.
There's an association of facilities managers that, to me, we need to have a discussion with them, because they may have a whole set of rules that you can call yourself this and you can call yourself this. And most of the larger corporations are a member of IFMA. And so I think we need to have a discussion with them, because they may be following their rules that we don't know about, and they don't know they're, violating what we deem is correct. So I think we need to have a lot of discussion before we start issuing penalties. So,
Susan, I think that's good guidance on that, is that if we got a trade organization or something that we can reach out to, I think that's a really good way to do that. But I think on this particular, have we had a motion in a second yet?
We have not.
No.
Okay. I think on this particular case, let me ask one quick question. If we do a letter of caution, can we also in that letter of caution say, we believe you're in violation of our Title Act. We would like to discuss this so that you have an opportunity to correct this issue. Failure to do so may result in, because I just don't want them to say, well, okay, we got this letter of caution really good, and then not have any action on the back end of it, because at some point a penalty may be the only thing that we've got to escalate the issue and to bring the attention to what we've got. I mean, you can kind of ignore a letter of caution if you're so inclined to do so, but a penalty is a little bit harder to do that. At least the threat of one in the future. I don't want this to be the off-the-hook moment.
Absolutely, we can add that language or something akin to let them know that despite this letter closing these complaints, ongoing violation, which the board has determined this is, can result in complaints being opened again and penalties being assessed.
You'd like to make a motion?
Yeah, I was supposed to go make the motion then. So I would like to make a motion that we issue a letter of caution, and in the letter of caution, say that we believe that this is a violation of the Title Act, failure to remedy the situation to the satisfaction of, I assume, you, because you're the staff attorney, may result in further penalties, or result in fines and penalties at a later date, or something along those lines. Just that, I'll let you make that sound a little bit better than what it is.
Robert, would you entertain a slight amendment to that?
I always entertain you.
I just want to say, I would like for the letter to include some type of reference to the fact that we're concerned about the public implying, I just don't want to come across as we're being protective of the title. I want there to be some explanation with regard to the public assumes, based on your usage of the title, and the underlying potential for health, safety, and welfare of the public being violated.
Absolutely.
I think that's a good ad. I will agree to that ad.
I'm happy to do that. I'll write a custom letter for this. Well, I tend to anyway, because I'm wordy, but I'll do that.
Good ad. Thank you.
Grant, I know you're new on the board, but you are the public member.
Public, Grant.
No, it's been interesting to follow the conversation. Something I've probably noticed, but never really thought about. So I think y'all are thinking through it very effectively, and I feel like it's the right direction to go.
All right, you don't think we're all crazy?
Please, God, tell us.
We have a motion that's been amended that I'm assuming you've agreed with. Do we have a second?
Second. Oh no, he seconded already.
I'll second it.
Grant, you seconded the motion. Thank you. Okay, now we have a motion and a second on the table. Do we have discussion? And Mr. King, I believe we do.
I think Robert used the term letter of caution. Someone else used letter of instruction.
I said letter of instruction.
Okay.
That's softer.
Yeah. So you want caution?
Caution, yes,
Okay.
yes, I do.
Okay. We have a motion and a second, and Susan.
I just looked up the IFMA organization. They are worldwide with 24,000 members, so I feel like that would be a good opportunity to have an open discussion with them. They're saying facility professionals, so there may be something in discuss. So that's all I wanted to add. Yes, I'm sure they do.
Kathy?
Well, since you brought that up, when I was in Jacksonville, I won't say how many years ago, but it started with a 198. I was actually a member of IFMA because some of my clients were these big building owners, and we were fighting this battle in Florida PEs versus IFMA. So this is not new. So I'm glad to hear that they've changed that, and they won't be offended by the conversation either.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion? There being none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
All right, our final case is a represent that I am doing on behalf of one of our newest attorneys, Ashley Gino. But this case was mine before, so I'm quite knowledgeable on it. I donated this one to her for a learning opportunity. We've been working together on it. She's done a good job. The case is 2017-024021. In this case, we had a licensee that was disciplined in another jurisdiction due to allowing an unlicensed plan stamping. I'll just sum it up. Plan stamping. They were found to be accountable of that. This board wanted our discipline for that action to be reciprocal, to be identical. So for them to comply with Mississippi's discipline, which was a $7,500 penalty, as well as serving a 2-year suspension of their license here in Tennessee. The reason this has taken some time is there was a represent after contact with us and other members because the licensee here made a plea that by applying Mississippi's discipline to him in Tennessee, the discipline would actually be more strict because his employment is here and he would lose his employment while he did not work in Mississippi, as he worked for a corporate entity here, basically doing I forget. I'm so sorry. John Cochran taught me the word. I forgot it now. Cochran. He looks at franchise locations and adjusts those plans based on sites in order to ensure that that their model will fit for the unique places. You all know more than me. However, what has happened is because it took us a while to be notified of this complaint as well as to go through all this process, he's actually paid his penalties and served his time in Mississippi, and so he is now no longer being disciplined there. His license is inactive because I think he doesn't want anything more to do there, and he's happy at his corporate job here. But that puts us into kind of a mootness situation where the discipline we wanted, he has done, but we didn't want to close the complaint without indicating that we took action. So rather than the solution to this weird issue of him having done what we ultimately would have demanded he do was to issue instead a letter of caution with the intent of that letter indicating that you can be disciplined in any jurisdiction you're registered in, especially in Tennessee, if you have misconduct in another jurisdiction. So that way we are still recording that we took action without closing it, but we were kind of stumped on any sort of alternative since he has done what we required.
Everyone has heard the case that's presented. Do we have a motion on the case? Opinion, Alton.
I'm assuming that this person's not practicing in Mississippi anymore, but he's licensed and practicing in Tennessee.
That's correct.
Has there been any additional complaints or violations since?
We've had interactions with the individual he was assisting in Mississippi here. I mean, we've taken discipline against that person, but this individual, I think, I don't want to assume his state of mind, but from all the actions I've taken, I think that this was quite the experience, and he is now just in his position, not doing outside jobs at all, so working for his corporate entity.
Brian?
I think I'm ready for a motion, but I want to make sure I understand. Is the actual motion that we're still, I'm reading, we haven't changed our recommendation, but it's just that it's already been done, something. So what exactly would I be recommending for?
Sure.
I think I understand it, but I'm not sure I can restate it.
I think that what we're asking is that this case be closed upon issuance of a letter of caution in light of respondents' compliance with Mississippi. And that would address the idea that we were going to indefinitely suspend until that occurred, so that we can recognize that that did ultimately happen, that was fulfilled.
And I make a recommendation to go with staff's recommendation.
A motion, do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion? There being none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
That does it. Thank you so much. I appreciate you all.
The next item we have is nominations. Out.
Could I suggest that we have a break?
You're not allowed.
Okay. Wait a minute, hold on.
I thought.
Could I suggest
if everybody needs a break, I'm good with that. Stephen?
I'm good with the break, but there was a past legal report that I reviewed that the recommendation that the board approved was it was about a land surveyor, and it was to send it to the land surveyors board, and it's been, I don't know, maybe 6 months now, and well, I haven't heard anything back.
Yes. I believe that they closed the complaint and didn't file a violation, but I'm definitely would love to check up on that, and I appreciate the reminder, and I'll get with their...
I think, at least my opinion was that we would give them an opportunity, but there's definitely a violation there, and I think we will need to address that if they chose not to.
Perfect. I will seek that down actually on the break, get a status update, and at minimum intend to have it before you at the next meeting.
That'd be fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. King. I appreciate that.
And we've got a quick update that Liz will give us on the rules before we go into the nominating committee. I don't know if we want to break now and continue there, or you want to go ahead and finish the rules. We've been at this for a while, so I'll completely.
Go ahead.
It'll make it easier to wrap up all of legal section. I just wanted to give you a brief update on the status of where our rule changes are. You guys had 4 different rule packages that are going through the rulemaking process. The first one that I'll discuss is the one where you reduced, eliminated the engineer intern fee. And there was a few other small changes along with that rule package. Those rules were filed with the Secretary of State on April 25th, 2018, and have an effective date of July 24th, 2018, pending any opposition that we might receive at the Government Operations Committee, which is next Wednesday. So those look like they're on track to be effective towards the end of July, which is good news. We've also got the rulemaking hearing continuing education rules. Those were submitted to the governor's office on June 8th. So as soon as we hear word back from the governor that those are approved, I will send them back to the Attorney General for final approval, and then they'll be filed with the Secretary of State. So those are getting closer to the end of their process. We'll also have the rulemaking hearing probably a few months from now, but I will give you all a heads up as to when that will be. We just don't have a slotted date on the calendar for that just yet. Some more good news about the rule amendments to the seals and indexes for digital signatures. Those were approved, pre-approved by the AG on June 5th, and the governor's office approved them on June 13th. So our next step with those rules will be to submit to the Attorney General for final review and then file with the Secretary of State. And then our most recent rulemaking package, the one covering architectural associates and additional means of gaining progressive experience credit, were submitted for pre-review to the AG on May 16th. So we should be hearing back about any edits for those shortly. So those were your 4 rule packages that are moving through. They're all making really great progress, and I haven't heard any negative feedback. Of course, I will let you know at the next meeting any edits that might be substantive that you would need to review, but they're all on track. So.
10-minute break.
It's 11:30.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Crazy, man.
And why they didn't.
Yeah, that's weird.
Yes, it is actually. Be fair.
I promised I wouldn't say anything. I said I had gone to the edge of where I'm effective on that. So.
Good. Hey, did you get the call key? He's at the office. Goods in Santa Fe or New Hampshire?
We are back in business. Thank you.
Okay, the next item on the agenda, I believe, is nominations and election of new officers. And I believe Rick is the chairman of the nominations committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We previously submitted a list or suggested a list for everyone's consideration, and we didn't receive any comment or any additional nominations, and the floor is open for nominations, by the way. So, but the nominating committee for 2019 officers are pretty much the same as we previously submitted to you. We're recommending the chairman be Robert Campbell. Right, Robert? Just making sure you're...
Sorry, I thought I'd already agreed that.
I'm sure. I'm just making sure you're okay with that again.
Yes, sir.
All right.
If elected, I will serve.
Oh, thank you very much.
Would anybody like to nominate anybody?
Thank you, sir. And Vice Chair, we're recommending Blair Parker.
If elected, I will serve.
Thank you very much, Mr. Parker. That sounds politically correct, as everything is today. And as Secretary, we're recommending Brian Tibbs.
I also, if elected, will serve.
Very good, thank you. So we have a slate of suggested officers and nominated officers. Again, the floor is open for any nominations.
Have any other nominations? None. That being the case, would somebody like to make a motion that we approve?
I will make a motion that we approve the slate of officers as presented by Rick Thompson.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is any other discussion? There being no discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm honored.
So are we.
You know what this means, don't you? As the chairman, I can't say squat.
Thank you for serving.
Strategy involved.
How about the chairman yet?
Okay, moving on. Director's report.
Thank you, Mr. Baxter, very much. We were going to finalize our NCWS annual meeting. We have talked about it at the last board meeting. It is in August in Scottsdale, Arizona, the 15th through the 18th. We've been approved to only send to 3 funded members, and so we discussed it yesterday at the engineer meeting, and 2 members happened to not be available to go anyway, so I think we're down to 3 and maybe our public board member if we had to debate between the 4 since 2 were not going. As it stands, we've been approved for the state to pay for the attorney and myself, but all 5 members not being able to go, so it would have to be 3 that we select.
I'm unavailable that weekend, if it makes things easier.
Yes. So that would leave us with Kathy, Robert, and Ricky attending. Is that correct?
Yes.
Dates didn't work. Now, if
the last time we were together, you remember how that went, don't you?
And we can put through the justification, but we don't have to do it for the 3. That's just the most we can do, obviously. 15th through the 18th of August in warm Scottsdale.
Anybody doesn't want to go, I'd be glad. That is a hot time of the year.
Yes, it is.
Scottsdale,
Yes,
Arizona.
it is.
Does there need to be any?
We will, because at the last meeting, I think we had at least 5 going, so just to rectify for the record, we'll need a motion for the 3 attending, and we have them as Mr. Robert Campbell, Mr. Ricky Bursai, and Ms. Kathy Ware would be going. If we can get a motion for that, we'll start the justification today, because there isn't that much time. We want to make sure to get everybody registered and so forth.
Okay, do I hear a motion?
So moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion in 2 seconds. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. On your iPads, it's one of the last items. We do have the budget information. I want to point you to it. It's on page 19. This isn't, the March and April aren't great looking months because we don't have our high revenue that we do from the exam results, so those are coming in. Don't let those worry you. The April number ends up for the fiscal year to date at 89,919 deficit, but you're going to see that increase in revenue here soon. So we do have the results already from the April exams, and we've been getting the flurry of those licensees, which is great. So we have that big increase coming in, and that's the same historical view. With this being new to me, I always refer back to what happened last year and the year before. So that's always been the case. We're going to be in good shape, but right now those last 2 months were kind of high. The only other, I think that's the only piece that I did want to explain if there are any other questions. The expenses having gone up again, very much in line with what historically we've seen, which is when the grants all get paid out of our expenses. That's our big month, so we go from 29 to 40,000 to 200, almost 300 in a month. So that will level off, and we should be in good shape. Any questions on the budget? Okay. Last item on your iPad, I just need a motion. These are administrative complaints, which are, of course, just the letters of cautions and instruction. We've made the report to just reflect the May ones, and we opened a total of 6 cases in April that are the letters of instruction, and 13 in the month of May, and I'll update that spreadsheet to send to you all moving forward. But we just need a motion to close all of those.
Your motion to close.
So move.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. We mailed grant letters to a total of 17 schools. These are the letters that inform the schools that the time is coming up for them to submit their request for funds. I went ahead and followed pretty much the same letter that John had used in the past. We mailed it out June 5th of last year, so we're a little bit ahead, and I'll take any extra time we can get so that I'm sure that we're not missing anything. I've given Susan Ballard the copies of the letters in hand, so in case we've missed anything, want to make any changes, she'll have them. But they went out in the mail, I believe, late last week or early this week to all those schools. So it's 17 schools, and we should hear back. What we did is ask them to make sure to submit their paperwork early, I think the 2nd of August. That'll give us a little bit of leadway before the meeting to make sure that the grant committee has everything that they need and a good amount of time to read and review them. And then I hope to be able to have conversations and connect also with the universities, make sure that for the October meeting that they're here. If they've got any questions, that we can answer them. That's kind of where we are with the grant. It's making sense. I've got the spreadsheet, so hopefully this will all fall in line. And last year we ended right at the $350,000, so we're good. And that leads us right to the October meeting date. Our meeting date will be the same as last year. I believe you all had half a day, a full day, and then half a day or something along those lines. So we're going to follow that same process, invite the universities that are coming in to present. Pardon me. And we're going to have it here in this building. That'll allow the staff to be here. That'll allow us to be recorded live as usual. And then the thought is the following year we would go to a university if one asks us to go, but we won't be going to a park. We'll be holding the meeting here. And August 2nd and 3rd, I believe. Give me just a minute. October, I'm sorry. October, yeah.
October, I've got October 3rd, 4th, and 5th.
That's it.
Is that right?
That is correct. And they're already on the website. We'll also make sure to set up our schedule for 2018 2019 at that time to give ourselves plenty of time and reserve the room. Yes.
So typically on Saturday, we have board time as well. Are we not doing that this year?
Did you do that last year? I didn't find that on the record.
Last year I was in Italy, so no, I didn't. But,
Okay.
But the year before we did, so
Okay.
that's why I marked off 4 days. So if
Okay.
we're not, that's okay.
Yeah.
Meeting is the last day, isn't that correct? Yes. That would be Friday the 5th.
Right. Unless we have a reason to extend you on to Saturday, I would love for us to be done between those 3 days. I think early way before then, we'll have an idea of how much business we're going to cover, how many schools are coming in. So my goal would be to not keep you here Saturdays, right?
Okay. That's your report?
That is all I have. I'll turn it over to the committee meetings then.
Anybody have any questions for Roxana? There being none, let's move on to the Engineering Committee report. Ricky Bursey.
Yes, sir. We reviewed 3 applications for comedy licensure, or in one case to make progress in making a comedy application. And all 3 of the cases are not straightforward. 2 of those were in cases where our education requirements, it wasn't clear whether they were being met or not. And in one case, it's not clear whether the progressive experience that we require was being met or not. And we have to provide the balancing act of we have to work with the laws and rules that we have and safeguard the public by making sure applicants meet those. And at the same time, we need to continue to bring in qualified engineers to do work in the state and not hinder that process. So all of those really resulted in obtaining more information about those cases in an effort to see if they in fact do meet our laws and rules. So that really all 3 of those cases are ongoing. So that happened yesterday. We also gave an update on the Southern Zone meeting of NCEES, and that included topics like mobility and decoupling progressive experience with taking the PE exam, QBS, the qualifications-based selection, talked about definitions for architecture and engineer, and then, of course, we talked about the use of the title engineer and tire engineer. So that's been the topic of the week, I guess. But all of those were topics discussed at NCES at the regional meeting. So it really is very helpful to get a read on what other states are doing. We're not the only ones facing those topics. And then we had further discussion about decoupling and definitions. And that's really the end of my report. If somebody's got a comment.
Robert, can you, for the public, and I'm thinking about some of the others, the professional societies represented, tell them about the status of some of the decoupling states around us, please?
Yes. Yes. We know that Kentucky has had decoupling in effect for a number of years. Let's see. Alabama is now past decoupling. South Carolina has passed it. Virginia had been against it, but they have now approved it because other states have it. Louisiana is now decoupled. Texas is decoupled. And as I said previously, Kentucky has been decoupled. Arkansas is not yet approved decoupling. So that was kind of reported at the Southern Zone meeting.
So I think that's like 2 or 3 more in contiguous to us that since the last meeting. Okay.
Mr. Bursey, if you wouldn't mind, I was going to add a few notes that I took from the law enforcement forum.
Please.
Apologize I didn't have them with me yesterday, but I did want to add things that were relevant to this board, that Mississippi does have an engineering definition, and they were one of the states that I would like to reach out to as far as the positive and negative involving having a definition. Also, Texas and Mississippi mentioned that their references are confidential, and that was a rule that this board did try to pass last year but was denied by our Attorney General. So I just wanted to give the board that update. Also in Texas, they require a fingerprint background check for every single applicant and database alerts for future crimes that occur once the applicant has applied. So I thought that was interesting as well. And then Georgia has seen some issues with the title forensic engineer being issued.
Thank you. The next report's the Architects Committee report is Rick Thompson.
Yes, this morning we had one topic of discussion, and that is the exam authorization for Tennessee, of course. NCARB has volunteered to review all of the applications for exam, or all the exam applicants, and based on that, they will make the recommendations and handle the exam applicants, which will take that off the responsibility of the staff and us to review those applicants, because what you basically need is a NAB accredited degree to sit for the exam. You can take the exam anytime after graduation, and then of course you have to satisfy the NCARB requirements for experience prior to they recommending you for licensure. And at that time, recommendation for licensure, then we would be re-engaged from the staff and the architects approving the licensure. So that's helpful in regard to freeing up the staff for things that are more, not that that's not important, but more urgent, if you will, for them. I did give this a little more thought. That I would like to bring one thing up, is if the applicant has not started a file with NCARB, then they would have to apply directly to the state.
Or open that file, because they're going to need to be a member either way, correct?
Yeah, in order to get licensed, they will have to have NCARB.
Correct.
Yeah, so
Correct.
that there may be
Kind of goes hand in hand,
Yeah.
and for the exam purpose, I think they also have to apply.
So that's just a little confusion that we might get, but
Especially if it's a financial concern, 'cause-
And it is.
And
It
they
could
may,
be.
and so that would be, in that case, we would take them, absolutely, run them by the board, approve them to take the exam. So it would be on that case by case if that's the situation.
And
can
I
see that.
don't remember having seen one, but
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
it could
It could
be an
happen.
issue.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right.
Our goal is never to delay the applicant, so we would quickly get them.
Sure.
Yeah.
So that's just a thought I
Absolutely.
had after we discussed it. But that's basically it, is that NCARB is stepping up and handling that for multiple states, and we are happy that they are. So that's my.
The other two ways that I'm aware of to get their approval is, besides NAB approval, is they have two programs. One's the BEP, which is the Broadly Experienced Program, and the other is the IPAL, which is an integrated program through university. So there are other ways, not just NAB approval. Anyway, moving on, I do have one question on new business. I noticed this thing that was handed out has a disciplinary action that's fairly lengthy on the back side of it. I think it came from you, maybe.
I did not provide a handout this
Southern
meeting.
Conference of the NCARB 2018
Oh, the
annual
notes
meeting.
for the architects, your notes to update?
Oh, the NCARB report.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I'm sorry. What was your question again?
The last two pages have a disciplinary action.
Yes, it's got redacted for the complainant, but NCARB did ask for any, I guess, big news in the disciplinary realm. So each state was asked to share a case or two that they were dealing with to help other states learn from each other. So I included the one that was most relevant to our board.
That hadn't been resolved yet, I'm assuming.
So this is one of Sarah's cases. If you would prefer a different case be included in our report, that's completely fine. If you have one you'd like me to add, if you wouldn't mind emailing me, I'd be happy to amend that portion.
And I think that if you don't mind, I'd give you a quick update on where that's at. We are currently going through the
But
process.
for those of you that weren't on the architect committee, I'll make sure that you have paper as well, and we'll email it. This is what we're going to share for the, just what Tennessee has done or what we're doing in rules to update the NCARB meeting. So for those of you not on that committee, I'll make sure that you have it as well.
Yes, and at the NCAAS meeting, they asked for that verbally from the states, but NCARB actually sent an email requesting a written report prior to the conference. So that's what we're referring to.
And if you don't have it in front of you, the complaint being referred to is that TDOT complaint that we have. So, and we have officially started the contracting process to get our reviewers, and it is making its way through internally as well as with the Central Procurement Office. So we're moving it along. So it's good timing to bring that up.
Just kind of out of the blue type thing.
Yes, I apologize. I thought you were
Understand.
referring to a document that the full board received, and I was going to say that I did not give out a document for that this morning, but the NCARB report that was given to the architect committee.
Are we in new business?
We're in new business.
Kind of, sort of done. So we just decided on the October retreat, right? And
Correct.
We're going to be meeting, I assume, we've got some different rooms, right?
We will have this A, B, and C, which is a conference room with a table, sits, I think, 20, that we can reserve as well.
Okay.
We also have rooms on the 6th floor. The video recording is not as great. These two stream live, and that way we have a place where we can take breaks and have food and what have you, but we can look at the 6th floor as well.
Okay, I just want to make sure we had multiple
Space.
rooms, because we did that one year where we had one room, and it was terrible. Just because you had different committees trying to meet and people trying to go back and forth, it was kind of disruptive.
Okay.
Do we have a list of some of these topics we're going to talk about at the retreat? And I don't know if I'm trying to remember, I don't know if we've ever formally published that or not, or do you have a list, Roxana? Because I know we've been churning a few things around. I mean, this Title Act is one that we recently discussed, and I'm sure you guys have got some others and I just wonder if there was an official list that we could kind of look at and say, hey, that's good, or maybe we need to add this, and try to pare that down or do whatever we need so that we can have, and it doesn't have to happen today, but I mean, sometime before the meeting, I'd like to try to make sure we got that paired. Is that a good question?
And the decoupling and the Title Act I have on things that you actually today and yesterday said we want to talk about. So I welcome any other, even before the August meeting, so we can have a list going in August, let you all review it, so we know what it is that is
Kind of
pending.
send that out,
Yeah.
maybe just kind of a started,
Absolutely.
people comment on it or adding stuff to it or something. We can talk more in the
Of
August
course,
meeting
we'll
about
always
it.
notice the meeting agendas, so anyone that wants to join us in October and chime in if the board allows the public, the public commentary portion, they'll be aware of the conversation topics. They'll be posted well in advance of the meeting. And please email us individually if you'd like to add to the list.
Again, I have gotten an email from the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance asking me to complete the SANS security training that Wanda told me was
You can
not-
disregard it. I think it's the one we did a long time ago that, no?
I've never done one. And there are other people on the email chain, including John Cothran, that supposedly are supposed to do this. I don't know if it's real or not. So, anyway.
We would have been told it would have come either from Wanda or from myself, forwarding
Then
from
I'm
HR.
going to delete it one more time. Frank, you're in there too. Ricky, you're in there. So, anyway. Okay, that's all.
Thank you. For your information, I'll be attending the ASLA and CLARB, that's American Society of Landscape Architects, and the Council of Landscape Architecture Registration Boards Licensure Summit in 2 weeks, 2 weekends from now. And it's where obviously CLARB and ASLA comes together and discusses licensure, and you get to compare notes with those around the United States. And a good thing for me is that the ASLA representative will be there, from Tennessee will also be there. And the expense is all borne by CLARB in my case. So just to let you know.
Okay.
Columbus, Ohio.
I'm sorry.
I know.
Is there any other new business?
I just had a quick announcement. Our new paralegal, Jared Stamper, is going to be working on an updated law and rules packet at the request of Mr. Heathcott, and you will each have an updated version of our laws and rules to refer to during the meeting. It was time. It's okay.
Yeah. Any other business? If not, I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you. I just want to remind everyone that the work group session starts at 2 o'clock, so you have, this time I'm not rushing you through lunch, but those of you that are part of that, or all of you are invited, of course, it'll start in this room at 2 o'clock. Pardon me?
Public meeting?
Yes, it's videotaped and so forth, absolutely.
All right. How long?
2 hours and 15 minutes.
2 hours and set the record.
10 minutes, technically.
2 hours and 10 record.
Yeah.
Ma'am.
Okay, I guess we will call to order the second meeting of the QBS working group. Appreciate everyone coming today. I had no idea what sort of attendance we would have, so was really surprised when I got back in the office last week and found out that we had almost every single person plus one more. So maybe before we go further, if we could go around, just introduce ourselves like we did last time. For the sake of the video camera and then for each other also to facilitate better discussion. I'll get us started. My name is Carter Lawrence, and I am Assistant Commissioner here at the Department of Commerce and Insurance. I'll turn it over to Robert.
I'm Robert Campbell. I'm the East Tennessee member of the Architects and Engineers Board.
I'm Frank Wagster. I'm the West Tennessee architectural representative of the A&E Board.
I'm Rick Thompson. I'm the East Tennessee architectural representative on the AE Board.
I'm Sharon Rollins. I'm a consultant in public works for MTAS, which is part of the University of Tennessee's Public Service Institute.
I'm Libby McCroskey, Manager of Legal Services for the University of Tennessee County Technical Assistant.
I'm John Hull. I'm the Deputy Commissioner for General Services.
I'm Lori Bryant. I'm representing the Tennessee Association of Public Purchasing.
Chloe Schaefer with the Office of the State Architect.
Ann McGarren, State Architect.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, everyone, for coming back. And Lori, welcome. Very glad to have you here to have a explicitly purchasing perspective on here. It's fantastic. So I wanted to get us started by just kind of reviewing what we had talked about in our first meeting before we moved forward. There were a couple of things that we had talked about where we got started just taking a look at QBS and what qualification-based selection is. And then second, we talked about the history of why we had gotten together and some of the questions and concerns from both registrants and public bodies that had led to the creation of this group and the reason why I had reached out to ask all of you to join us here. We talked about our goal, which was to create guidance that would be applicable to both public bodies and to registrants, and that would be created in a format that we could host it on a website, it could be printed off and distributed, but something that would be meaningful, approachable, and would also be thorough. So those were kind of the goals that we talked about before we moved on to a discussion. And the two highlights that I took away from the discussion as I rewatched to prepare for this was that we talked about the need for good communication on the topic of QBS. And then secondly, as kind of our deliverable, was to take a look at MTAS's QBS guidance that Sharon was good enough to share with us. So after the meeting, I emailed to all of you that document. I hope everyone had the chance to take a look at it. If you didn't, I have a few copies spread about, and then I've got another one here with me. So if anyone wanted to take another look at it while we're here. So I wanted to see if, having said that, and if we could kind of jump into the purpose, get back to talking about our goal of creating guidance that would be two-sided. It would be both for the registrants and for the public bodies. And especially to get us started in light of the document that we reviewed that Sharon had created. So if I could maybe just stop there, see if anyone wanted to pick up. Robert,
I'll go ahead.
You started us last time.
Sure. Well, you know what? The fat kid always starts, right? That's where the food is. But so I reviewed the MTAS document, and thank you. It's very thorough. And I made a few comments. One of the things that I think we may want to look at is that, to me, the MTAS document has pretty much all the stuff that we want in it. I think it may be overly complex for just the regular person looking at something to do it. So I think that may need a little fleshing out back and forth. There are a couple other things that I think, and I'm just going to give you some overview type stuff from my standpoint. One of the things is there's some mention in here about needing interviews, and I don't think that's always the case. I don't know that if you know who your consultant's going to be, the interview process is kind of redundant and forces extra work on both groups. So that's one of the things. The other thing that I think is a huge issue when you do any RFQ is this bait and switch kind of thing that happens on RFQs where you have a certain staff listed, but you actually get presented with other staff based on availability or whatever happens. And there may need to be something in this process that says if you're going to use A, B, C, and D, we expect A, B, C, and D to be on your team because that's what we're picking your firm based on. And if you're going to substitute those, then we need to approve that in advance. And I know it's an issue in another state agency that I've talked to in the last couple months. They'll get the job based on this, but then when they get the deliverable, it's lesser qualified people. And that's something I think on some level needs to be addressed in here. And the third thing was on the pre-existing relationship with people. Not every job needs to go through this whole process. For instance, if you're doing a renovation of this room, and it's a pretty simple renovation, why do you go through the entire process to do something like this if you've worked with 10 other people that have done this type of project? And I think if we can do some of that, that may help some, because it's time consuming on everybody's part to review an RFQ, to create an RFQ, to do all those kind of things for something that you already know there's 10 firms that you've worked with in the past that have done that exact thing. And I don't know exactly how we get there, but I mean, my thing would be to take some of those and other people's ideas on some of the MTAS and try to get that fleshed out a little bit and make some of those kind of comments and try to rewrite it or tailor it a little bit more, and because it's got all the pieces and parts in here, it's just getting it in a little bit more workable. That's my opinion.
So to restate, you like this, found it helpful, would maybe want to use this as a model, but with some edits, amendments.
Right, and the three things that I saw as sort of weaknesses that I think can be improved on, those three things I was talking about. And there may be others, but again, a well-written document, and it certainly went through the QBS process pretty much verbatim and had all the things and bells and whistles that we would expect. But I think if we can do something like that, Carter, I think that would get a unified document that we could all go back and refer to. I still think we need to have the FAQs out there because there are some things in the definition that may get lost. But anyway, that's another discussion.
Anyone else have any thoughts related to the MTAS QBS document? And I should pause and say we'd also welcome public comment in the same way that we had last time. Several people from the audience come up. Just be sure to introduce yourself, but we'd welcome comment from the public as well.
Just as a practitioner of this, I've used this QBS model before, and because prior to my current job, I was in the municipal side, so I had access, or everybody has access to it, but I use the MTAS guide quite often, and have typically found it to be very good as a model of how to go about doing the selection process when it's needed. There are times, as he said, that there is a pre-existing relationship, and that may need to be spelled out a little better in here to say that this is not always required, but the model itself, I feel like, is a very good model, and with some modifications, and usually we modified it slightly anyway as a practice, but the overall 1 through 7 or whatever it is steps, 9, were the model in general that we followed.
Have a specific idea in mind for the pre-existing relationship, how that would amend the flow of the numbers 1 through 7?
Typically, sometime after you've defined the project, you would know at that point this is a project that somebody else has done preliminary work on. When we built the building in the first place, this was the architect on it, and we're just building an addition onto this, so the architect would be a logical person to do that work. Or so once you've defined the project, the project manager would know at that point, what would be needed.
Am I hearing you say that sometimes when you're doing the evaluations of the qualifications, one particular firm or proposer stands out as being, more qualified than any of the other people, and that's the firm you would directly go with, or you don't even solicit it?
So if that particular situation or something similar came up, no, we may not solicit proposals. Have the opportunity to go ahead and select whom we wish. So we are
speak to your small projects designer selection that might be a good model?
Yeah, it's, we, on a small project, not necessarily dollars-wise, but just not complicated small projects. You can pre-qualify certain firms or contractors, all that, to be able to bid on those things. So anyway, that's what I'm hearing you say, is that you just almost have this pre-qualified group essentially ready to go on those type of projects.
I was thinking even more about when you have small dollar projects. I think y'all typically can request from, say, 3 who you think, based on your previous experience, would be qualified, and then just do a simplified.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't know that that's something we would want to mandate to the municipalities and counties and such, because I feel certain that many of them are not doing a competitive process every time. They are knowing that it's seen as optional. It's the competitive process itself is seen as optional. So
that's just a really different perspective from the way the state takes the interpretation of the. So.
There's a part of the statute that I think doesn't apply to the state, that does apply to local governments, that says that if they have a satisfactory existing working relationship for architects or engineering services, they can expand the scope of that services as long as they're within the technical expertise of those people. And I think that's what we're going at. I think that's what Lori's talking about. So maybe, I don't think the state does that.
Yeah.
Do you?
Thank you, Libby. That's why I was getting confused, because we obviously don't look at it because it doesn't apply to us.
So it sounds like that's something that we need to address in some format in the guidance that we put out. The caveat that you raised and that, Libby, that you just affirmed is something that we probably need to make clear for the registrants and the public bodies in whatever it is that we end up putting out. Else have any similar additions or alterations, what they would like to see addressed?
I don't have an addition, but I do have a question. Going forward, what is the process? I mean, are you going to take the MTAS and attempt to revise it or make revisions based on what's discussed? Or is the group going to do it or somebody else? You know, I really hadn't got a feel for what happens past this meeting.
Right. Well, I think that's up for debate. I would say that I would probably not be the right person to take the document and amend it. Just from kind of ease of making that happen, I would think that it'd probably be best for a small, for a kind of a subcommittee to take the input of this discussion that's happening right now, amend the document, and then come back for approval at a subsequent meeting. That's what I'm gathering is kind of the direction that we're going here.
Once the document is agreed upon, then the idea would be that back to our FAQs, if there's the part of it that relates to QBS, we would tie that to the MTAS version of qualification-based selection. Is that correct?
The goal is the product. So in this case, what we're talking about, potentially this edited MTAS QBS guidance would be posted in order to give guidance to both the registrants and public bodies so that we're giving something that's dually applicable. So replacing, it's not just a narrow FAQ, but this broader guidance on QBS.
Our what was taken out now from our FAQs is in relationship to QBS. What goes back in its place?
This document that we're talking about.
Just, if you want to know what to do, read this document, basically.
Right.
Paraphrasing, but yeah.
Sure, yeah. And from the board's perspective, we want to make sure that it's really relevant for the registrants, but we also want to make sure that when this invariably is going to the public bodies, that it's also useful for them and it's going to be specific, but also broad enough for capturing the different scenarios.
And I guess my only fear is, this spells out exactly what needs to be done or will, but for the general local government, bidding on them, getting RFPs for high school or whatever, is there any way to condense it down so it's real simple? It's like, here's what you do in 5 easy steps, and I'm being facetious, but rather than, I'm not sure any of them are going to read the whole document. That's what I'm afraid.
As far as how it could be distilled, I would leave that to whoever it is that might amend the document to make it applicable for this working group. Again, I don't think I'm the right person to do that. My hope here is to just facilitate, to make sure that we're going to end up doing the job that we were tasked with, but I would leave that to people wiser than I. But I think that's a good goal, to make sure that it's as relevant as possible and that it'll be read. I as a layman reading this, I found it approachable. That's what I was sharing with Sharon earlier, that even though it's a little lengthy at first brush, once you actually read it, it's pretty quick. And the last couple pages are the examples of how the interview works, for example.
Process, yeah.
So maybe there is some that could be cut from it. For example, when the entire TCA is in there, if that was just hyperlinked, then that would take out a pretty big section. So there probably are some ways to get the page number down without altering it that much, but if it's the will of the group to alter, that'd be fine by me.
And the process of ensuring that they go through this process for selection, is that dependent on if they put out RFP and it says, give us your fee, is that up to the architect to report that, or is there some other body that oversees these procurement?
We're still not talking about changing the enforcement structure. So the goal is not for the Board of Architects and Engineers to become that enforcement mechanism.
But might be audited.
Sure,
in some
yeah.
way
They certainly,
comptroller.
the comptroller would look askance at that RFP that you just mentioned. Public comment.
So I'm Susan Ballard. I'm the interior design representative to the Architectural and Engineering Board. I get calls from registrants from time to time, and there was one in the last, say, 6 weeks where there was obviously written into the RFP that there was information there that there's no way that the average person would be able to bid on that project because of the time constraints, the request for fees, and various other things listed. I think it would be important for Libby and Sharon to be able to have in there, depending on the size of the project, how much time a person would actually have to respond to it, and that it's a reasonable amount of time and not one that's already been geared to a certain firm. And I just think that makes it more open and fair to those that are participating in the bid. And I actually ended up referring the registrant to Ashley so that she could respond to that local government for that particular bid process. So just wanted to bring that up. The other issue is those of us in the back can't hear if the microphone's not lit up. So those of you that are new sitting up here, please speak into the microphone. Thank you.
Thanks for the reminder.
As far as the pre-qualified firms that work with the governmental entities, we have relationships that are like that, where they have 3 or 4 architects that have certain areas of expertise that they go to after the pre-qualifications. So it's an ongoing relationship, and it's a negotiated, not a fee proposed project. So I get that part. One of the things that comes up is the value of the project as well as the complexity, John, like you were talking about. So is there something that we might consider? Is there a cost threshold that, it might be like some of the municipal cost thresholds in the law now? Is there a dollar amount that could be associated with that? Is it $25,000? Is it $75,000? I don't know. I'm just asking the question as we get through this process of editing this document. Is that something that we might think about?
Is the question whether in the code there are the thresholds that you're talking about, or if that's just a best practice?
But actually, there are some identified that are in the laws and rules, but then best practice as well to go in this document. I mean, is it a project that's, let's just keep using this room for an example. It's so many square feet, and you've got a $10,000 finish schedule or cost. I mean, that didn't make sense to go out and get 5 firms to give you a number on it. They're going to spend $3,000 doing it. So if there's a threshold of cost that you've got that list of qualified firms, is there a municipal cutoff point where, all right, I've got a $75,000 project and I've got these 3 architects that I can use for this $75,000 project, or do I have a $20 million project and then I needed to do the QBS? I mean, is there some validity to that? I'm just throwing it out there for discussion.
It appears like the question is, how many people do you need to solicit, depending upon the project size? Within state government, we do have thresholds about, the complexity of the solicitation process. You're still going through all the various steps to a certain degree. You're just going through, I think Chloe and John talked about it earlier on, what we would deem minor projects. You can do a direct solicitation with 3 firms, get their responses. The responses can be 4 pages of information, and you can make the selection from an evaluation team based on that, whereas much more complicated or larger projects could result in, a public posting, electing all bids, maximum page requirements of 50 on their interviews involved and all kinds of things. So there is a degree of that. And I don't know whether it would make sense for this document to identify those, but it might be in the frequently asked questions or some best practices, and it might be a dollar threshold, but you might also give people to think about the complexity of the projects that they're looking at, because certainly more complex, smaller projects might require more specific skill sets than less complicated larger projects. So I think there's a lot of variation to that.
Separate flow chart. If we have the QBS under steps, 1 through 9 from the document that we have in front of us, for these smaller projects, are we talking about steps 1 through 4, or are these entirely different steps? What does that look like? And I use steps 1 through 4 without even looking down to see what it was. Just, is it separate, or is it just fewer steps? If you follow my question.
And again, that's part of my question. How can we simplify this and try to give them some guidance as to a complexity and a dollar amount? Is that something that we can do? Would Marion County or one of the other counties look at that and say, yeah, we ought to think about doing this because it's over a certain dollar amount, right? Just as a guide. Sure. So
if you fall into category A, which is 0 to 10,000, you're going to use this process. If you're in category B, which is 10,000 to 25, you're in a separate, and so on and so on. Is that what you have in mind?
That's what I'm thinking. Yes.
Okay.
And I don't think that's not the law. But I mean, I would actually go back to what the state does as an example of what the qualifications of those projects are. I mean,
I think you could put it in a frequently asked questions.
Yes.
I'm trying to understand the complexity of my procurement based on my project cost, and I think you could give an example that says the state currently has this degree of complexity as a reference point. But I don't think it would be part of the guide per se, but more of kind of the frequently asked questions that might reference people to other resources.
But yeah, I agree.
When they might say, what is an appropriate fee? The question about what might be the appropriate amount of time for a solicitation? What might I expect this process to take, or those kind of things. I think that the frequently asked questions would probably be the best place to put that in, and then you can reference other resources or other documents that they can go in to look at to understand how to best use this guide. And I think one of the questions that was raised was about simplifying this document. I think all the information really needs to be out there, and people will use it differently. There might be, and maybe because I'm an architect and I think in pictures, I think this way, but there might be like a flow chart that shows people the steps and gives them a graphic representation of kind of, how they get from here to there, and then they would reference those sections to get more detail about it. If they feel like they've got a pretty good understanding of what the scope of their project is, they might not feel they need to read that, but they might be looking at, the selection process. Well, I really want to think about selection process and read that section in a little bit more detail. So I think there are ways to simplify a document without making it actually less pages.
And you were absolutely correct in the FAQ. That's really where I was taking my thought process, not trying to change the document, but hey, here's what you need to be thinking about. This might be where you need to do the RFQ, and that's what I'm talking about. It's kind of simplify that question and that answer, not this document necessarily. So.
Other resources or guides that they can look at to educate if they haven't done it a ton of times. Although, Lori, what do you think? You were about to say something.
I agree that a flow chart would be helpful, and just general guidance on what may be cost thresholds. I wouldn't want to tell somebody that once you get to $50,000, you have to do something like this, unless they're thinking locally, their board or their commission had made that part of their policy. Or unless the General Assembly agrees that that's the case as well. But yeah, I think that those are all good points. So, I do also agree that a lot of the information that's in here should be in here and available for consideration. Even if somebody says we don't need a short list at this point, we know based on that there's one firm that stood out of their proposals that we don't need to do an interview. So we're going to skip step 6 and move on. Those kinds of things. So, but as long as the guide is in there, I think that's helpful to everybody.
Other thoughts on from the group or from the audience about how this MTAS QBS document could potentially be used? What we would put out?
Have a comment on the steps 1 through 9. I'm just commenting on because we go through this process fairly regularly. One of the weak points usually in this process is usually number 1. We get requests to interview for projects that are not well defined, and that's project ends up being something somewhat different. But anyway, nevertheless, I'm just throwing that out. And the other part is step 5, is notifying the firms of the results. I agree with that part. The site visit, and here's the question, is that a visit of the firm or is that a visit of the
It was intended to be the project site.
Sometimes it's better to visit the firm. In any case, sometimes you don't have a site even on early stages. The state does, but some other projects you might be doing. But I do think step 1, and again, that's a whole different discussion, but the better step 1 is done, the better the process will go.
So if we're kind of running out of steam on how this document might be amended, but if we are in agreement that we would like to use this kind of as a base, and Sharon had, in advance of this meeting, shared with me that this public domain, and she would be happy to see that done. So maybe we could talk about who would like to participate in doing that, because I don't think that this is the appropriate forum to actually kind of get into the editing of this. I think that probably a subsection of this group would do it. So maybe see if volunteers to see who would be interested in participating in doing that.
I vote for Robert.
I second. I mean, I don't mind being a representative from the, and as somebody that goes through the selection process, I think that would be good, because I agree with what we don't want to have happen is we want people to use the process that's out there and think that it's fair and reasonable in every situation. And I'm afraid some of the smaller communities get overwhelmed with the process and they just don't use it. And I can understand why. If you're resurfacing a road, why do you want to have 10 RFQs come into your place when you've got a engineer sitting in town that's done 50 road resurfacing projects that's fully capable of doing that? And as long as you've got a fee schedule that you can bounce that off of, what should be the fees for that, which we have plenty of those out, I mean, that's just what, and all it does is encourages everybody to cheat. I'm not talking about, the state's got your own process, I mean, and that's good, but on the local level, it encourages everybody to go, I don't even need this, so I'm just going to go do whatever I want to do. And I've seen that multiple times, and I'm sure you all have too. And I just want to make this as simple as possible to where everybody feels like they're getting value, but at the same time, the public is getting a qualified person to do the job so that we don't have legacy costs that come and bite us later on, because this is public money and it needs to be spent in the correct way, and the correct analysis needs to take place. So I'd be willing to serve on it. I mean, I'm not a very good wordsmith. I'm a loud talker, but not a good wordsmith. So, but I'd be glad to do that and get input from other practitioners to see what we need to do. I just think it can be distilled a little bit on what we're doing. Not necessarily the document, but what we tell people they need to go through.
I'm not sure if that qualifies you as a volunteer, since almost kicking and screaming you said yes, but I appreciate it, Robert. Thank you.
You know, I'm on a roll now. I mean, Tech was the first OVC team to make it to the Super Regional, so we have to be a little proud. Very happy. So I reckon I'm on a high right now.
Not all at once. Anyone else?
If it's appropriate to have two board members, one from the engineering side and the architecture side, I'll be glad to be on the committee. So, person committee.
Purchasing, Lori, could you participate in that? All right, fantastic. Thank you.
So just in terms of the state resources and how that would go in, I think
I think I see Susan Ballard volunteering.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. I'm not quite sure. We'll have to figure out the details about how that can work. Want to make sure that we give enough time for that to coalesce. I had in mind not that we wouldn't keep the same relatively tight schedule since we had last met in April, but maybe see if that subcommittee, if you will, could have its recommendation by September, and then if at that point we could try and reconvene to see if this working group could take a look and hopefully approve the product that would have come out from that additional work. So how does that sound? Right? We're not a formal board where we need to vote on anything, so I think nods and yeses. Great. Okay.
Question.
I would actually point out, though, that like folks like Sharon and Libby, and John, you're not completely off the hook. You to still become technical advisors. You know, certainly since we're working with the MTAS document, you know, we would want to make sure that we you guys as a resource before something got cut or understood. So
that's a great point. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. That was my question. Are we going to rely? Yeah. So.
You don't have to fly blind.
No.
Okay.
Well, I guess from one other perspective of the professional societies, would there be any other input from societies or other people outside this committee that's going to be doing this review, the wordsmithing or whatever we want to call it?
Yeah, I would hope so. I mean, Lori, I think some members of your group probably have some ideas of.
I'm sure they do.
And I've talked to a lot of them, and they've told me about the frustrations, which are where a lot of this comes up, and they feel like sometimes they're getting taken advantage of, and why do we have to review all this, and we can't tell the difference sometimes, and I don't want this to be, again, the process doesn't need to be that frustrating that it's not getting used correctly, you know?
Terry McKee from Knoxville's Community Development Board, their housing authority there in Knoxville, had expressed an interest in this as well. And there may be some municipality or county that would be interested. So I'll back with our association and see if there's.
Have another public comment?
I was just going to quickly say on behalf of ACEC, TSP, AIA, and the landscape architects, we would also love to, if there is room for none of you all to be there, we would appreciate that as well, or at least one of us representing the others. Sorry, Casey Anderson on behalf of the American Council of Engineering Companies of Tennessee and the Tennessee Society of Professional Engineers.
And Roxana, can you tell us is there a September board meeting?
There is not. There's August, and then there's October.
August and then October. Okay. Well, let me pose the question to the members of that newly formed committee. Would August be too aggressive a deadline to try and have a product back so that we could, the working group could then accept or maybe amend the recommendation?
Speaking for my office, I'd say yes, since this is our busiest time of the entire year.
Speaking for me, I say yes, that's too soon.
All right. So I think we could plan on October, and in the same way that sent out communications in advance of this one, in the coming days, we'll send kind of a recap about where we are on this and then planning for the future, what that date is. Although, unless do you have it right now, Roxana?
Yes, it's October 3rd, 4th, and 5th. That's our long meeting where we're here actually all 3 days or almost.
Is one of those a Thursday?
Yes, Thursday's the 4th.
Okay. So I think we'll plan on Thursday the 4th, 2 o'clock. We'll try and keep this going. Susan's shaking her head no.
Susan Ballard, I think it'd be better, Mr. Lawrence, excuse me, if we check the agenda, because we have a very full meeting with the deans and our programs and our committees. It may need to be an evening instead of a morning, But anyway, we just need to check the agenda.
So we will take a look at that agenda, and we'll have communication about the timing of it. So maybe even potentially not the 4th, but we'll aim for somewhere in that time period and send out the specifics of it in the coming days. So, okay. Well, once again, thanks
Can I ask
everyone for coming.
one more question?
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Rick.
Will you still be the lead on even though you're not going to be doing the wordsmithing? But I mean, we're going to have some kind of a
it'll
committee leader, if you will.
Some sort of conduit or whatever the term is. Yeah, I'd be happy to continue to play that role.
I just, who's giving us direction? That's what, So, all right, thank you.
I'll do my best.
Yeah.
Okay. My office would be the organizing force behind that.
You'll be the adult in the room then.
I cannot promise
No,
that.
okay, all right, thank you.
We'll do our best. All right, well, again, thanks everyone for coming and for your participation. Really appreciate it. And we'll look forward to seeing you in October if we don't see all of you before then. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Did they have a really good